Chapter 26 of The Three Musketeers. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 26. Aramis and His Thesis. D'Artagnan had said nothing to Porthos of his wound or of his procurator's wife. Our Béarnais was a prudent lad, however young he might be. Consequently, he had appeared to believe all that the vainglorious Musketeer had told him, convinced that no friendship will hold out against a surprised secret. Besides, we feel always a sort of mental superiority over those whose lives we know better than they suppose. In his projects of intrigue for the future, and determined as he was to make his three friends the instruments of his fortune, D'Artagnan was not sorry at getting into his grasp beforehand the invisible strings by which he reckoned upon moving them. And yet, as he journeyed along, a profound sadness weighed upon his heart. He thought of that young and pretty Madame Bonacieux, who was to have paid him the price of his devotedness. But let us hasten to say that this sadness possessed the young man less from the regret of the happiness he had missed than from the fear he entertained that some serious misfortune had befallen the poor woman. For himself, he had no doubt she was a victim of the cardinal's vengeance, and, as was well known, the vengeance of his Eminence was terrible. How he had found grace in the eyes of the minister he did not know, but without doubt Monsieur de Cavois would have revealed this to him if the captain of the guards had found him at home. Nothing makes time pass more quickly or more shortens a journey than a thought which absorbs in itself all the faculties of the organization of him who thinks. External existence then resembles a sleep of which this thought is the dream. By its influence, time has no longer measure, space has no longer distance. We depart from one place and arrive at another, that is all. Of the interval passed, nothing remained in the memory but a vague mist in which 1,000 confused images of trees, mountains, and landscapes are lost. It was as a prey to this hallucination that D'Artagnan travelled, at whatever pace his horse pleased, the 6 or 8 leagues that separated Chantilly from Crèvecoeur, without his being able to remember on his arrival in the village any of the things he had passed or met with on the road. There only his memory returned to him. He shook his head, perceived the cabaret at which he had left Aramis, and putting his horse to the trot, he shortly pulled up at the door. This time it was not a host but a hostess who received him. D'Artagnan was a physiognomist. His eye took in at a glance the plump, cheerful countenance of the mistress of the place, and he at once perceived there was no occasion for dissembling with her, or of fearing anything from one blessed with such a joyous physiognomy. "My good dame," asked D'Artagnan, "can you tell me what has become of one of my friends, whom we were obliged to leave here about a dozen days ago?" "A handsome young man, 3 or 24 years old, mild, amiable, and well made?" "That is he, wounded in the shoulder." "Just so. Well, monsieur, he is still here." "Ah, pardieu, my dear dame," said D'Artagnan, springing from his horse, and throwing the bridle to Planchet. "You restore me to life. Where is this dear Aramis? Let me embrace him. I am in a hurry to see him again." "Pardon, monsieur, but I doubt whether he can see you at this moment." "Why so? Has he a lady with him?" "Jesus! What do you mean by that? Poor lad! No, monsieur, he has not a lady with him." "With whom is he, then?" "With the curate of Montdidier and the superior of the Jesuits of Amiens." "Good heavens!" cried D'Artagnan. "Is the poor fellow worse, then?" "No, monsieur, quite the contrary; but after his illness grace touched him, and he determined to take orders." "That's it," said D'Artagnan. "I had forgotten that he was only a Musketeer for a time." "Monsieur still insists upon seeing him?" "More than ever." "Well, monsieur has only to take the right-hand staircase in the courtyard and knock at number 5 on the 2nd floor." D'Artagnan walked quickly in the direction indicated, and found one of those exterior staircases that are still to be seen in the yards of our old-fashioned taverns. But there was no getting at the place of sojourn of the future abbé. The defiles of the chamber of Aramis were as well guarded as the gardens of Armida. Bazin was stationed in the corridor, and barred his passage with the more intrepidity that, after many years of trial, Bazin found himself near a result of which he had ever been ambitious. In fact, the dream of poor Bazin had always been to serve a churchman, and he awaited with impatience the moment, always in the future, when Aramis would throw aside the uniform and assume the cassock. the daily renewed promise of the young man that the moment would not long be delayed, had alone kept him in the service of a Musketeer, a service in which, he said, his soul was in constant jeopardy. Bazin was then at the height of joy. In all probability, this time his master would not retract. The union of physical pain with moral uneasiness had produced the effect so long desired. Aramis, suffering at once in body and mind, had at length fixed his eyes and his thoughts upon religion, and he had considered as a warning from heaven the double accident which had happened to him, that is to say, the sudden disappearance of his mistress and the wound in his shoulder. It may be easily understood that in the present disposition of his master nothing could be more disagreeable to Bazin than the arrival of D'Artagnan, which might cast his master back again into that vortex of mundane affairs which had so long carried him away. He resolved then to defend the door bravely, and as, betrayed by the mistress of the inn, he could not say that Aramis was absent, he endeavored to prove to the newcomer that it would be the height of indiscretion to disturb his master in his pious conference, which had commenced with the morning, and would not, as Bazin said, terminate before night. But D'Artagnan took very little heed of the eloquent discourse of Monsieur Bazin, and as he had no desire to support a polemic discussion with his friend's valet, he simply moved him out of the way with one hand, and with the other turned the handle of the door of number 5. The door opened, and D'Artagnan went into the chamber. Aramis, in a black gown, his head enveloped in a sort of round flat cap, not much unlike a calotte, was seated before an oblong table, covered with rolls of paper and enormous volumes in folio. At his right hand was placed the superior of the Jesuits, and on his left the curate of Montdidier. The curtains were half drawn, and only admitted the mysterious light calculated for beatific reveries. All the mundane objects that generally strike the eye on entering the room of a young man, particularly when that young man is a Musketeer, had disappeared as if by enchantment, and for fear, no doubt, that the sight of them might bring his master back to ideas of this world, Bazin had laid his hands upon sword, pistols, plumed hat, and embroideries and laces of all kinds and sorts. In their stead, D'Artagnan thought he perceived in an obscure corner a discipline cord suspended from a nail in the wall. At the noise made by D'Artagnan in entering, Aramis lifted up his head and beheld his friend. But to the great astonishment of the young man, the sight of him did not produce much effect upon the Musketeer, so completely was his mind detached from the things of this world. "Good day, dear D'Artagnan," said Aramis. "Believe me, I am glad to see you." "So am I delighted to see you," said D'Artagnan, "although I am not yet sure that it is Aramis I am speaking to." "To himself, my friend, to himself. But what makes you doubt it?" "I was afraid I had made a mistake in the chamber, and that I had found my way into the apartment of some churchman. Then another error seized me on seeing you in company with these gentlemen. I was afraid you were dangerously ill." The two men in black, who guessed D'Artagnan's meaning, darted at him a glance which might have been thought threatening, but D'Artagnan took no heed of it. "I disturb you, perhaps, my dear Aramis," continued D'Artagnan, "for by what I see, I am led to believe that you are confessing to these gentlemen." Aramis colored imperceptibly. "You disturb me? Oh, quite the contrary, dear friend, I swear. And as a proof of what I say, permit me to declare I am rejoiced to see you safe and sound." "Ah, he'll come around," thought D'Artagnan. "That's not bad." "This gentleman, who is my friend, has just escaped from a serious danger," continued Aramis, with unction, pointing to D'Artagnan with his hand, and addressing the two ecclesiastics. "Praise God, monsieur," replied they, bowing together. "I have not failed to do so, your reverences," replied the young man, returning their salutations. "You arrive in good time, dear D'Artagnan," said Aramis, "and by taking part in our discussion may assist us with your intelligence. Monsieur the Principal of Amiens, Monsieur the Curate of Montdidier, and I are arguing certain theological questions in which we've been much interested. I shall be delighted to have your opinion." "The opinion of a swordsman can have very little weight," replied D'Artagnan, who began to be uneasy at the turn things were taking, "and you'd better be satisfied, believe me, with the knowledge of these gentlemen." The two men in black bowed in their turn. "On the contrary," replied Aramis, "your opinion will be very valuable. The question is this: Monsieur the Principal thinks that my thesis ought to be dogmatic and didactic." "Your thesis? Are you then making a thesis?" "Without doubt," replied the Jesuit. "In the examination which precedes ordination, a thesis is always a requisite." "Ordination!" cried D'Artagnan. who could not believe what the hostess and Bazin had successively told him, and he gazed half stupefied upon the three persons before him. "Now," continued Aramis, taking the same graceful position in his easy chair that he would have assumed in bed, and complacently examining his hand, which was as white and plump as that of a woman, and which he held in the air to cause the blood to descend. "Now, as you have heard, D'Artagnan, Monsieur the Principal is desirous that my thesis should be dogmatic, while I, for my part, would rather it should be ideal. This is the reason why Monsieur the Principal has proposed to me the following subject, which has not yet been treated upon, and in which I perceive there is matter for magnificent elaboration. Utraque manus imbenicendo clericis inferioribus necessaria est." D'Artagnan, whose erudition we are well acquainted with, evinced no more interest on hearing this quotation than he had at that of Monsieur de Tréville in allusion to the gifts he pretended that D'Artagnan had received from the Duke of Buckingham. "Which means," resumed Aramis, that he might perfectly understand, "the two hands are indispensable for priests of the inferior orders when they bestow the benediction." "An admirable subject!" cried the Jesuit. "Admirable and dogmatic," repeated the curate, who, about as strong as D'Artagnan with respect to Latin, carefully watched the Jesuit in order to keep step with him, and repeated his words like an echo. As to D'Artagnan, he remained perfectly insensible to the enthusiasm of the two men in black. "Yes, admirable, prorsus admirabile," continued Aramis, "but which requires a profound study of both the Scriptures and the Fathers. Now, I have confessed to these learned ecclesiastics, and that in all humility, that the duties of mounting guard and the service of the king have caused me to neglect study a little. I should find myself, therefore, more at my ease, facilus natans, in a subject of my own choice, which would be to these hard theological questions what morals are to metaphysics in philosophy." D'Artagnan began to be tired, and so did the curate. "See what an exordium!" cried the Jesuit. "Exordium," repeated the curate, for the sake of saying something. "Quemat modum inter colorum immensitatem." Aramis cast a glance upon D'Artagnan to see what effect all this produced, and found his friend gaping enough to split his jaws. "Let us speak French, my father," said he to the Jesuit. "Monsieur d'Artagnan will enjoy our conversation better." "Yes," replied D'Artagnan, "I am fatigued with reading, and all this Latin confuses me." "Certainly," replied the Jesuit, a little put out, while the curate, greatly delighted, turned upon D'Artagnan a look full of gratitude. "Well, let us see what is to be derived from this gloss. Moses, the servant of God, he was but a servant, please to understand. Moses blessed with the hands. He held out both his arms while the Hebrews beat their enemies, and then he blessed them with his two hands. Besides, what does the Gospel say? Imponite manus, and not manum. Place the hands, not the hand." "Place the hands," repeated the curate with a gesture. "St. Peter, on the contrary, of whom the popes are the successors," continued the Jesuit, "porrige digitos, present the fingers. Are you there now?" "Certes," replied Aramis in a pleased tone, "but the thing is subtle." "The fingers," resumed the Jesuit. "St. Peter blessed with the fingers. The Pope, therefore, blesses with the fingers. And with how many fingers does he bless? With 3 fingers, to be sure, one for the Father, one for the Son, and one for the Holy Ghost." All crossed themselves. D'Artagnan thought it was proper to follow this example. "The Pope is the successor of St. Peter, and represents the 3 divine powers. The rest, ordines inferiores, of the ecclesiastical hierarchy, bless in the name of the holy archangels and angels. The most humble clerks, such as our deacons and sacristans, bless with holy water sprinklers, which resemble an infinite number of blessing fingers. There is the subject simplified. Argumentum omni denudatum ornamento. I could make of that subject 2 volumes the size of this," continued the Jesuit, and in his enthusiasm he struck a St. Chrysostom in folio, which made the table bend beneath its weight. D'Artagnan trembled. "Certes," said Aramis, "I do justice to the beauties of this thesis, but at the same time I perceive it would be overwhelming for me. I had chosen this text. Tell me, dear D'Artagnan, if it is not to your taste. Non inutile est desiderium in oblatione. That is, a little regret is not unsuitable in an offering to the Lord." "Stop there," cried the Jesuit, "for that thesis touches closely upon heresy. There is a proposition almost like it in the Augustinus of the heresiarch Jansenius, whose book will sooner or later be burned by the hands of the executioner. Take care, my young friend. You are inclining toward false doctrines, my young friend. You will be lost." "You will be lost," said the curate, shaking his head sorrowfully. "You approach that famous point of free will which is a mortal rock. You face the insinuations of the Pelagians and the semi-Pelagians." "But, my reverend," replied Aramis, a little amazed by the shower of arguments that poured upon his head. "How will you prove," continued the Jesuit, without allowing him time to speak, "that we ought to regret the world when we offer ourselves to God? Listen to this dilemma. God is God, and the world is the devil. To regret the world is to regret the devil. That is my conclusion." "And that is mine also," said the curate. "But for heaven's sake," resumed Aramis. "Desideras diabolum, unhappy man," cried the Jesuit. "He regrets the devil. Ah, my young friend," added the curate, groaning, "do not regret the devil, I implore you." D'Artagnan felt himself bewildered. It seemed to him as though he were in a madhouse, and was becoming as mad as those he saw. He was, however, forced to hold his tongue, from not comprehending half the language they employed. "But listen to me, then," resumed Aramis, with politeness mingled with a little impatience. "I do not say I regret; no, I will never pronounce that sentence, which would not be orthodox." The Jesuit raised his hands toward heaven, and the curate did the same. "No, but pray grant me that it is acting with an ill grace to offer to the Lord only that with which we are perfectly disgusted. Don't you think so, D'Artagnan?" "I think so indeed," cried he. The Jesuit and the curate quite started from their chairs. "This is the point of departure. It is a syllogism. The world is not wanting in attractions. I quit the world, then I make a sacrifice. Now the Scripture says positively, 'Make a sacrifice unto the Lord.'" "That is true," said his antagonists. "And then," said Aramis, pinching his ear to make it red, as he rubbed his hands to make them white, "and then I made a certain rondeau upon it last year, which I showed to Monsieur Voiture, and that great man paid me 1,000 compliments." "A rondeau?" said the Jesuit disdainfully. "A rondeau?" said the curate mechanically. "Repeat it, repeat it!" cried D'Artagnan. "It will make a little change." "Not so, for it is religious," replied Aramis. "It is theology in verse." "The devil!" said D'Artagnan. "Here it is," said Aramis, with a little look of diffidence, which, however, was not exempt from a shade of hypocrisy. "Vous qui pleurez un pas plein de charmes, et qui traînez des jours infortunes, tous vos malheurs se verront terminer, quand à Dieu seul vous offrirez vos larmes, vous qui pleurez. You who weep for pleasures fled, while dragging on a life of care, all your woes will melt in air, if to God your tears are shed, you who weep." D'Artagnan and the curate appeared pleased. The Jesuit persisted in his opinion. "Beware of a profane taste in your theological style. What says Augustine on this subject? Severus sit clericorum verbo." "Yes, let the sermon be clear," said the curate. "Now," hastily interrupted the Jesuit, on seeing that his acolyte was going astray, "now your thesis would please the ladies. It would have the success of one of Monsieur Patru's pleadings." "Please God!" cried Aramis, transported. "There it is!" cried the Jesuit. "The world still speaks within you in a loud voice, altissima voce. You follow the world, my young friend, and I tremble lest grace prove not efficacious." "Be satisfied, my reverend father, I can answer for myself." "Mundane presumption!" "I know myself, father. My resolution is irrevocable." "Then you persist in continuing that thesis?" "I feel myself called upon to treat that and no other. I will see about the continuation of it, and tomorrow I hope you will be satisfied with the corrections I shall have made in consequence of your advice." "Work slowly," said the curate. "We leave you in an excellent tone of mind." "Yes, the ground is all sown," said the Jesuit, "and we have not to fear that one portion of the seed may have fallen upon stone, another upon the highway, or that the birds of heaven have eaten the rest. Aves coeli comederunt illam." plague stifle you and your Latin," said D'Artagnan, who began to feel all his patience exhausted. "Farewell, my son," said the curate, "till tomorrow." "Till tomorrow, rash youth," said the Jesuit. "You promised to become one of the lights of the Church. Heaven grant that this light prove not a devouring fire." D'Artagnan, who for an hour past had been gnawing his nails with impatience, was beginning to attack the quick. The two men in black rose, bowed to Aramis and D'Artagnan, and advanced toward the door. Bazin, who had been standing listening to all this controversy with a pious jubilation, sprang toward them, took the breviary of the curate and the missal of the Jesuit, and walked respectfully before them to clear their way. Aramis conducted them to the foot of the stairs, and then immediately came up again to D'Artagnan, whose senses were still in a state of confusion. When left alone, the two friends at first kept an embarrassed silence. It, however, became necessary for one of them to break it first, and as D'Artagnan appeared determined to leave that honor to his companion, Aramis said, "You see that I am returned to my fundamental ideas." "Yes, efficacious grace has touched you, as that gentleman said just now. Oh, these plans of retreat have been formed for a long time. You have often heard me speak of them, have you not, my friend?" "Yes, but I confess I always thought you jested." "With such things? Oh, D'Artagnan!" "The devil! Why, people jest with death." "And people are wrong, D'Artagnan, for death is the door which leads to perdition or to salvation." "Granted; but if you please, let us not theologize, Aramis. You must have had enough for today. As for me, I've almost forgotten the little Latin I have ever known. Then I confess to you that I've eaten nothing since 10 o'clock this morning, and am devilish hungry. We will dine directly, my friend, only you must please to remember that this is Friday. Now, on such a day I can neither eat flesh nor see it eaten. If you can be satisfied with my dinner, it consists of cooked tetragones and fruits." "What do you mean by tetragones?" asked D'Artagnan, uneasily. "I mean spinach," replied Aramis. "But on your account I will add some eggs, and that is a serious infraction of the rule, for eggs are meat, since they engender chickens." "This feast is not very succulent; but never mind, I will put up with it for the sake of remaining with you." "I am grateful to you for the sacrifice," said Aramis, "but if your body be not greatly benefited by it, be assured your soul will." "And so, Aramis, you are decidedly going into the Church? What will our two friends say? What will Monsieur de Tréville say? They will treat you as a deserter, I warn you." "I do not enter the Church, I re-enter it. I deserted the Church for the world, for you know that I forced myself when I became a Musketeer." "I know nothing about it." "You don't know I quit the seminary?" "Not at all." "This is my story, then. Besides, the Scriptures say, 'Confess yourselves to one another,' and I confess to you, D'Artagnan. And I give you absolution beforehand. You see I'm a good sort of a man." "Do not jest about holy things, my friend." "Go on, then, I listen." "I had been at the seminary from 9 years old. In 3 days I should have been 20. I was about to become an abbé, and all was arranged. One evening I went, according to custom, to a house which I frequented with much pleasure. When one is young, what can be expected? One is weak. An officer who saw me, with a jealous eye, reading the lives of the saints to the mistress of the house, entered suddenly and without being announced. That evening I had translated an episode of Judith, and had just communicated my verses to the lady, who gave me all sorts of compliments, and, leaning on my shoulder, was reading them a second time with me. Her pose, which I must admit was rather free, wounded this officer. He said nothing, but when I went out he followed, and quickly came up with me. 'Monsieur the Abbé,' said he, 'do you like blows with a cane?' 'I cannot say, monsieur,' answered I. 'No one has ever dared to give me any.' 'Well, listen to me then, Monsieur the Abbé. If you venture again into the house in which I have met you this evening, I will dare it myself.' I really think I must have been frightened. I became very pale. I felt my legs fail me. I sought for a reply, but could find none. I was silent. The officer waited for his reply, and seeing it so long coming, he burst into a laugh, turned upon his heel, and re-entered the house. I returned to the seminary. I am a gentleman born, and my blood is warm, as you may have remarked, my dear D'Artagnan. The insult was terrible, and although unknown to the rest of the world, I felt it live and fester at the bottom of my heart. I informed my superiors that I did not feel myself sufficiently prepared for ordination, and at my request the ceremony was postponed for a year. I sought out the best fencing master in Paris. I made an agreement with him to take a lesson every day, and every day for a year I took that lesson. Then, on the anniversary of the day on which I had been insulted, I hung my cassock on a peg, assumed the costume of a cavalier, and went to a ball given by a lady friend of mine, and to which I knew my man was invited. It was in the Rue des Francs Bourgeois, close to La Force. As I expected, my officer was there. I went up to him as he was singing a love ditty and looking tenderly at a lady, and interrupted him exactly in the middle of the second couplet. "Monsieur," said I, "does it still displease you that I should frequent a certain house of la Rue Payenne? And would you still cane me if I took it into my head to disobey you?" The officer looked at me with astonishment, and then said, "What is your business with me, monsieur? I do not know you." "I am," said I, "the little abbé who reads lives of the saints, and translates Judith into verse." "Ah, ah! I recollect now," said the officer, in a jeering tone. "Well, what do you want with me?" "I want you to spare time to take a walk with me." "Tomorrow morning, if you like, with the greatest pleasure." "No, not tomorrow morning, if you please, but immediately." "If you absolutely insist." "I do insist upon it." "Come, then. Ladies," said the officer, "do not disturb yourselves. Allow me time just to kill this gentleman, and I will return and finish the last couplet." We went out. I took him to the Rue Payenne, to exactly the same spot where a year before, at the very same hour, he had paid me the compliment I have related to you. It was a superb moonlit night. We immediately drew, and at the first pass I laid him stark dead. "The devil!" cried D'Artagnan. "Now," continued Aramis, "as the ladies did not see the singer come back, and as he was found in the Rue Payenne with a great sword wound through his body, it was supposed that I had accommodated him thus, and the matter created some scandal which obliged me to renounce the cassock for a time. Athos, whose acquaintance I made about that period, and Porthos, who had in addition to my lessons taught me some effective tricks of fence, prevailed upon me to solicit the uniform of a Musketeer. The king entertained great regard for my father, who had fallen at the siege of Arras, and the uniform was granted. You may understand that the moment has come for me to re-enter the bosom of the church." "And why today, rather than yesterday or tomorrow? What has happened to you today to raise all these melancholy ideas?" "This wound, my dear D'Artagnan, has been a warning to me from heaven." "This wound? Bah! It's now nearly healed, and I'm sure it's not that which gives you the most pain." "What then?" said Aramis, blushing. "You have one at heart, Aramis, one deeper and more painful, a wound made by a woman." The eye of Aramis kindled in spite of himself. "Ah," said he, dissembling his emotion under a feigned carelessness, "do not talk of such things, and suffer love pains. Vanitas vanitatum. According to your idea, then, my brain is turned. And for whom? For some grisette, some chambermaid with whom I've trifled in some garrison? Fie!" "Pardon, my dear Aramis, but I thought you carried your eyes higher." "Higher? And who am I to nourish such ambition? A poor Musketeer, a beggar, an unknown, who hates slavery and finds himself ill-placed in the world." "Aramis, Aramis!" cried D'Artagnan, looking at his friend with an air of doubt. "Dust I am, and to dust I return. Life is full of humiliations and sorrows," continued he, becoming still more melancholy. "All the ties which attach him to life break in the hand of man, particularly the golden ties. Oh, my dear D'Artagnan," resumed Aramis, giving to his voice a slight tone of bitterness, "trust me. Conceal your wounds when you have any. Silence is the last joy of the unhappy. Beware of giving anyone the clue to your griefs. The curious suck our tears as flies suck the blood of a wounded heart." "Alas, my dear Aramis," said D'Artagnan, in his turn heaving a profound sigh, "that is my story you are relating." "How?" "Yes, a woman whom I love, whom I adore, has just been torn from me by force. I do not know where she is, or whither they have conducted her. She is perhaps a prisoner; she is perhaps dead. Yes, but you have at least this consolation, that you can say to yourself she has not quit you voluntarily, that if you learn no news of her, it is because all communication with you is interdicted, while I—" "Well?" "Nothing," replied Aramis, "nothing." "So you renounce the world, then, forever? That is a settled thing, a resolution registered?" "Forever. You are my friend today; tomorrow you will be no more to me than a shadow, or rather, even, you will no longer exist. As for the world, it is a sepulchre and nothing else. The devil! All this is very sad which you tell me. What will you? My vocation commands me. It carries me away. D'Artagnan smiled, but made no answer. Aramis continued, "And yet, while I do belong to the earth, I wish to speak of you, of our friends." "And on my part," said D'Artagnan, "I wish to speak of you, but I find you so completely detached from everything. To love, you cry, fie! Friends are shadows, the world is a sepulchre." "Alas, you will find it so yourself," said Aramis, with a sigh. "Well, then, let us say no more about it," said D'Artagnan, "and let us burn this letter, which no doubt announces to you some fresh infidelity of your grisette or your chambermaid." "What letter?" cried Aramis, eagerly. "A letter which was sent to your abode in your absence, and which was given to me for you." "But from whom is that letter?" "Oh, from some heartbroken waiting woman, some desponding grisette. From Madame de Chevreuse's chambermaid, perhaps, who was obliged to return to Tours with her mistress, and who, in order to appear smart and attractive, stole some perfumed paper and sealed her letter with the duchess's coronet." "What do you say?" "Hold! I must have lost it," said the young man maliciously, pretending to search for it. "But fortunately the world is a sepulchre, the men, and consequently the women, are but shadows, and love is a sentiment to which you cry, fie, fie." "D'Artagnan, D'Artagnan!" cried Aramis, "you're killing me." "Well, here it is at last," said D'Artagnan, as he drew the letter from his pocket. Aramis made a bound, seized the letter, read it, or rather devoured it, his countenance radiant. "This same waiting maid seems to have an agreeable style," said the messenger, carelessly. "Thanks, D'Artagnan, thanks!" cried Aramis, almost in a state of delirium. "She was forced to return to Tours. She is not faithless. She still loves me. Come, my friend, come, let me embrace you. Happiness almost stifles me." The two friends began to dance around the venerable St. Chrysostom, kicking about famously the sheets of the thesis which had fallen on the floor. At that moment Bazin entered with the spinach and the omelette. "Be off, you wretch!" cried Aramis, throwing his skullcap in his face. "Return whence you came. Take back those horrible vegetables and that poor kickshaw. Order a larded hare, a fat capon, mutton leg dressed with garlic, and 4 bottles of old Burgundy." Bazin, who looked at his master, without comprehending the cause of this change, in a melancholy manner, allowed the omelette to slip into the spinach and the spinach onto the floor. "Now, this is the moment to consecrate your existence to the King of Kings," said D'Artagnan, "if you persist in offering him a civility. Non inutile desiderium oblationi. Go to the devil with your Latin. Let us drink, my dear D'Artagnan, morbleu! Let us drink while the wine is fresh. Let us drink heartily, and while we do so, tell me a little of what is going on in the world yonder." End of chapter 26.
Chapter 27 of The Three Musketeers. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 27. The Wife of Athos. "We have now to search for Athos," said D'Artagnan to the vivacious Aramis, when he had informed him of all that had passed since their departure from the capital, and an excellent dinner had made one of them forget his thesis and the other his fatigue. "Do you think, then, that any harm can have happened to him?" asked Aramis. "Athos is so cool, so brave, and handles his sword so skillfully." "No doubt. Nobody has a higher opinion of the courage and skill of Athos than I have. But I like better to hear my sword clang against lances than against staves. I fear lest Athos should have been beaten down by serving men. Those fellows strike hard and don't leave off in a hurry. This is why I wish to set out again as soon as possible." "I will try to accompany you," said Aramis, "though I scarcely feel in a condition to mount on horseback. Yesterday I undertook to employ that cord which you see hanging against the wall, but pain prevented my continuing the pious exercise. That's the first time I ever heard of anybody trying to cure gunshot wounds with cat-o'-nine-tails, but you were ill, and illness renders the head weak. Therefore you may be excused. When do you mean to set out? Tomorrow at daybreak. Sleep as soundly as you can tonight, and tomorrow, if you can, we will take our departure together. Till tomorrow, then, said Aramis, for iron-nerved as you are, you must need repose. The next morning, when D'Artagnan entered Aramis's chamber, he found him at the window. "What are you looking at?" asked D'Artagnan. "My faith, I am admiring 3 magnificent horses which the stable boys are leading about. It would be a pleasure worthy of a prince to travel upon such horses." "Well, my dear Aramis, you may enjoy that pleasure, for one of those 3 horses is yours." "Ah, bah!" "Which?" "Whichever of the 3 you like. I have no preference." "And the rich caparison, is that mine too?" "Without doubt." "You laugh, D'Artagnan." "No, I have left off laughing, now that you speak French." "What? Those rich holsters, that velvet housing, that saddle studded with silver, are they all for me?" "For you and nobody else, as the horse which paws the ground is mine, and the other horse which is caracoling belongs to Athos." "Peste! They are 3 superb animals." "I am glad they please you." "Why, it must have been the king who made you such a present." "Certainly it was not the cardinal, but don't trouble yourself whence they came. Think only that one of the 3 is your property." "I choose that which that red-headed boy is leading." "It is yours." "Good heaven! That is enough to drive away all my pains. I could mount him with 30 balls in my body. On my soul, and some stirrups. Hola, Bazin, come here this minute." Bazin appeared on the threshold, dull and spiritless. "That last order is useless," interrupted D'Artagnan. "There are loaded pistols in your holsters." Bazin sighed. "Come, Monsieur Bazin, make yourself easy," said D'Artagnan. "People of all conditions gain the kingdom of heaven." "Monsieur was already such a good theologian," said Bazin, almost weeping. "He might have become a bishop, and perhaps a cardinal." "Well, my poor Bazin, reflect a little. Of what use is it to be a churchman, pray? You do not avoid going to war by that means. You see, the cardinal is about to make the next campaign, helm on head and partisan in hand. And Monsieur de Nogaret de la Valette, what do you say of him? He is a cardinal likewise. Ask his lackey how often he has to prepare lint of him." "Alas!" sighed Bazin, "I know it, monsieur. Everything is turned topsy-turvy in the world nowadays." While this dialogue was going on, the 2 young men and the poor lackey descended. "Hold my stirrup, Bazin!" cried Aramis, and Aramis sprang into the saddle with his usual grace and agility, but after a few vaults and curvets of the noble animal, his rider felt his pains come on so insupportably that he turned pale and became unsteady in his seat. D'Artagnan, who, foreseeing such an event, had kept his eye on him, sprang toward him, caught him in his arms, and assisted him to his chamber. "That's all right, my dear Aramis. Take care of yourself," said he. "I will go alone in search of Athos." "You are a man of brass," replied Aramis. "No, I have good luck, that is all. But how do you mean to pass your time till I come back? No more theses? No more glosses upon the fingers or upon benedictions, hey?" Aramis smiled. "I will make verses," said he. "Yes, I dare say, verses perfumed with the odor of the billet from the attentive Madame de Chevreuse. Teach Bazin prosody, that will console him. As to the horse, ride him a little every day, and that will accustom you to his maneuvers." "Oh, make yourself easy on that head," replied Aramis. "You will find me ready to follow you." They took leave of each other, and in 10 minutes, after having commended his friend to the cares of the hostess and Bazin, D'Artagnan was trotting along in the direction of Amiens. How was he going to find Athos? Should he find him at all? The position in which he had left him was critical. He probably had succumbed. This idea, while darkening his brow, drew several sighs from him and caused him to formulate to himself a few vows of vengeance. Of all his friends, Athos was the eldest, and the least resembling him in appearance, in his tastes and sympathies. Yet he entertained a marked preference for this gentleman. The noble and distinguished air of Athos, those flashes of greatness which from time to time broke out from the shade in which he voluntarily kept himself, that unalterable equality of temper which made him the most pleasant companion in the world, that forced and cynical gaiety, that bravery which might have been termed blind if it had not been the result of the rarest coolness, such qualities attracted more than the esteem, more than the friendship of D'Artagnan, they attracted his admiration. Indeed, when placed beside M. de Tréville, the elegant and noble courtier, Athos in his most cheerful days might advantageously sustain a comparison. He was of middle height, but his person was so admirably shaped and so well proportioned that more than once in his struggles with Porthos he had overcome the giant whose physical strength was proverbial among the Musketeers. His head, with piercing eyes, a straight nose, a chin cut like that of Brutus, had altogether an indefinable character of grandeur and grace. His hands, of which he took little care, were the despair of Aramis, who cultivated his with almond paste and perfumed oil. The sound of his voice was at once penetrating and melodious, and then that which was inconceivable in Athos, who was always retiring, was that delicate knowledge of the world and of the usages of the most brilliant society, those manners of a high degree which appeared, as if unconsciously to himself, in his least actions. If a repast were on foot, Athos presided over it better than any other, placing every guest exactly in the rank which his ancestors had earned for him, or that he had made for himself. If a question in heraldry were started, Athos knew all the noble families of the kingdom, their genealogy, their alliances, their coats of arms, and the origin of them. Etiquette had no minutiae unknown to him. He knew what were the rights of the great landowners. He was profoundly versed in hunting and falconry, and had one day when conversing on this great art astonished even Louis XIII himself, who took a pride in being considered a past master therein. Like all the great nobles of that period, Athos rode and fenced to perfection. But still further, his education had been so little neglected, even with respect to scholastic studies, so rare at this time among gentlemen, that he smiled at the scraps of Latin which Aramis sported, and which Porthos pretended to understand. 2 or 3 times, even, to the great astonishment of his friends, he had, when Aramis allowed some rudimental error to escape him, replaced a verb in its right tense and a noun in its case. Besides, his probity was irreproachable, in an age in which soldiers compromised so easily with their religion and their consciences, lovers with the rigorous delicacy of our era, and the poor with God's 7th commandment. This Athos, then, was a very extraordinary man. And yet this nature so distinguished, this creature so beautiful, this essence so fine, was seen to turn insensibly toward material life, as old men turn toward physical and moral imbecility. Athos, in his hours of gloom, and these hours were frequent, was extinguished as to the whole of the luminous portion of him, and his brilliant side disappeared as into profound darkness. Then the demigod vanished. He remained scarcely a man. His head hanging down, his eye dull, his speech slow and painful, Athos would look for hours together at his bottle, his glass, or at Grimaud, who, accustomed to obey him by signs, read in the faint glance of his master his least desire and satisfied it immediately. If the four friends were assembled at one of these moments, a word, thrown forth occasionally with a violent effort, was the share Athos furnished to the conversation. In exchange for his silence, Athos drank enough for four, and without appearing to be otherwise affected by wine than by a more marked constriction of the brow and by a deeper sadness. D'Artagnan, whose inquiring disposition we are acquainted with, had not, whatever interest he had in satisfying his curiosity on this subject, been able to assign any cause for these fits, or for the periods of their recurrence. Athos never received any letters. Athos never had concerns which his friends did not know. It could not be said that it was wine which produced this sadness, for in truth he only drank to combat this sadness, which wine, however, as we have said, rendered still darker. This excess of bilious humor could not be attributed to play, for unlike Porthos, who accompanied the variations of chance with songs or oaths, Athos, when he won, remained as unmoved as when he lost. He had been known, in the circle of the Musketeers, to win in one night 3,000 pistoles, to lose them even to the gold-embroidered belt for gala days, win all this again with the addition of 100 louis, without his beautiful eyebrow being heightened or lowered half a line, without his hands losing their pearly hue, without his conversation, which was cheerful that evening, ceasing to be calm and agreeable. Neither was it, as with our neighbors the English, an atmospheric influence which darkened his countenance, for the sadness generally became more intense toward the fine season of the year. June and July were the terrible months with Athos. For the present he had no anxiety. He shrugged his shoulders when people spoke of the future. His secret, then, was in the past, as had often been vaguely said to D'Artagnan. This mysterious shade, spread over his whole person, rendered still more interesting the man whose eyes or mouth, even in the most complete intoxication, had never revealed anything, however skillfully questions had been put to him. Well, thought D'Artagnan, poor Athos is perhaps at this moment dead, and dead by my fault, for it was I who dragged him into this affair, of which he did not know the origin, of which he is ignorant of the result, and from which he can derive no advantage. Without reckoning, monsieur, added Planchet to his master's audibly expressed reflections, that we perhaps owe our lives to him. Do you remember how he cried, "On, D'Artagnan, on! I am taken!" And when he had discharged his 2 pistols, what a terrible noise he made with his sword! One might have said that 20 men, or rather 20 mad devils, were fighting. These words redoubled the eagerness of D'Artagnan, who urged his horse, though he stood in need of no incitement, and they proceeded at a rapid pace. About 11 o'clock in the morning they perceived Amiens, and at 11:30 they were at the door of the cursed inn. D'Artagnan had often meditated against the perfidious host one of those hearty vengeances which offer consolation while they are hoped for. He entered the hostelry with his hat pulled over his eyes, his left hand on the pommel of the sword, and cracking his whip with his right hand. "Do you remember me?" said he to the host, who advanced to greet him. "I have not that honor, monseigneur," replied the latter, his eyes dazzled by the brilliant style in which D'Artagnan traveled. "What? You don't know me?" "No, monseigneur." "Well, 2 words will refresh your memory. What have you done with that gentleman against whom you had the audacity, about 12 days ago, to make an accusation of passing false money?" The host became as pale as death, for D'Artagnan had assumed a threatening attitude, and Planchet modeled himself after his master. "Ah, monseigneur, do not mention it," cried the host, in the most pitiable voice imaginable. "Ah, monseigneur, how dearly have I paid for that fault, unhappy wretch as I am!" "That gentleman, I say, what has become of him?" "Deign to listen to me, monseigneur, and be merciful. Sit down, in mercy." D'Artagnan, mute with anger and anxiety, took a seat in the threatening attitude of a judge. Planchet glared fiercely over the back of his armchair. "Here is the story, monseigneur," resumed the trembling host, "for I now recollect you. It was you who rode off at the moment I had that unfortunate difference with the gentleman you speak of." "Yes, it was I, so you may plainly perceive that you have no mercy to expect if you do not tell me the whole truth." "Condescend to listen to me, and you shall know all." "I listen." "I had been warned by the authorities that a celebrated coiner of bad money would arrive at my inn, with several of his companions, all disguised as guards or Musketeers. Monseigneur, I was furnished with a description of your horses, your lackeys, your countenances. Nothing was omitted." Go on," said D'Artagnan, who quickly understood whence such an exact description had come. "I took then, in conformity with the orders of the authorities, who sent me a reinforcement of 6 men, such measures as I thought necessary to get possession of the persons of the pretended coiners." "Again," said D'Artagnan, whose ears chafed terribly under the repetition of this word coiners. "Pardon me, monseigneur, for saying such things, but they form my excuse. The authorities had terrified me, and you know that an innkeeper must keep on good terms with the authorities." "But, once again, that gentleman, where is he? What has become of him? Is he dead? Is he living?"
"Patience, monseigneur, we are coming to it. There happened then that which you know, and of which your precipitate departure," added the host with an acuteness that did not escape D'Artagnan, "appeared to authorize the issue. That gentleman, your friend, defended himself desperately. His lackey, who, by an unforeseen piece of ill luck, had quarreled with the officers, disguised as stable lads."
"Miserable scoundrel!" cried D'Artagnan. "You were all in the plot, then, and I really don't know what prevents me from exterminating you all."
"Alas, monseigneur, we were not in the plot, as you will soon see. Monsieur your friend, pardon for not calling him by the honorable name which no doubt he bears, but we do not know that name. Monsieur your friend, having disabled 2 men with his pistols, retreated fighting with his sword, with which he disabled one of my men, and stunned me with a blow with the flat side of it."
"You villain, will you finish?" cried D'Artagnan. "Athos, what has become of Athos?"
"While fighting and retreating, as I have told monseigneur, he found the door of the cellar stairs behind him, and as the door was open, he took out the key and barricaded himself inside. As we were sure of finding him there, we left him alone."
"Yes," said D'Artagnan, "you did not really wish to kill, you only wished to imprison him."
"Good God! To imprison him, monseigneur? Why, he imprisoned himself, I swear to you he did. In the first place, he had made rough work of it. 1 man was killed on the spot, 2 others were severely wounded. The dead man and the 2 wounded were carried off by their comrades, and I have heard nothing of either of them since. As for myself, as soon as I recovered my senses, I went to Monsieur le Governor, to whom I related all that had passed, and asked what I should do with my prisoner. Monsieur the Governor was all astonishment. He told me he knew nothing about the matter, that the orders I had received did not come from him, and that if I had the audacity to mention his name as being concerned in this disturbance, he would have me hanged. It appears that I had made a mistake, monsieur, that I had arrested the wrong person, and that he whom I ought to have arrested had escaped." "But Athos!" cried D'Artagnan, whose impatience was increased by the disregard of the authorities. "Athos, where is he?" "As I was anxious to repair the wrongs I had done the prisoner," resumed the innkeeper, "I took my way straight to the cellar in order to set him at liberty. Ah, monsieur, he was no longer a man, he was a devil. To my offer of liberty he replied that it was nothing but a snare, and that before he came out he intended to impose his own conditions. I told him very humbly, for I could not conceal from myself the scrape I had got into by laying hands on one of his Majesty's Musketeers. I told him I was quite ready to submit to his conditions. "In the first place," said he, "I wish my lackey placed with me, fully armed." We hastened to obey this order, for you will please to understand, monsieur, we were disposed to do everything your friend could desire. Monsieur Grimaud, he told us his name, although he does not talk much. Monsieur Grimaud then went down to the cellar, wounded as he was. Then his master, having admitted him, barricaded the door afresh, and ordered us to remain quietly in our own bar. "But where is Athos now?" cried D'Artagnan. "Where is Athos?" "In the cellar, monsieur." "What, you scoundrel! Have you kept him in the cellar all this time?" "Merciful heaven! No, monsieur. We keep him in the cellar? You do not know what he is about in the cellar. Ah, if you could but persuade him to come out, monsieur, I should owe you the gratitude of my whole life. I should adore you as my patron saint." "Then he is there? I shall find him there?" "Without doubt you will, monsieur. He persists in remaining there. We every day pass through the air-hole some bread at the end of a fork, and some meat when he asks for it. But alas, it is not of bread and meat of which he makes the greatest consumption. I once endeavored to go down with two of my servants, but he flew into a terrible rage. I heard the noise he made in loading his pistols, and his servant in loading his musketoon. Then, when we asked them what were their intentions, the master replied that he had 40 charges to fire, and that he and his lackey would fire to the last one before he would allow a single soul of us to set foot in the cellar. Upon this I went and complained to the governor, who replied that I only had what I deserved, and that it would teach me to insult honorable gentlemen who took up their abode in my house. So since that time, totally unable to refrain from laughing at the pitiable face of the host. "So from that time, monsieur," continued the latter, "we have led the most miserable life imaginable. For you must know, monsieur, that all our provisions are in the cellar. There is our wine in bottles, and our wine in casks, the beer, the oil, and the spices, the bacon and sausages. And as we are prevented from going down there, we are forced to refuse food and drink to the travelers who come to the house, so that our hostelry is daily going to ruin. If your friend remains another week in my cellar, I shall be a ruined man." "And not more than justice either, you ass! Could you not perceive by our appearance that we were people of quality, and not coiners, say?" "Yes, monsieur, you are right," said the host. "But hark! Hark, there he is!" "Somebody has disturbed him, without doubt," said D'Artagnan. "But he must be disturbed," cried the host. "Here are 2 English gentlemen just arrived." "Well?" "Well, the English like good wine, as you may know, monsieur. These have asked for the best. My wife has perhaps requested permission of Monsieur Athos to go into the cellar to satisfy these gentlemen, and he, as usual, has refused. Ah, good heaven! There is the hullabaloo louder than ever." D'Artagnan, in fact, heard a great noise on the side next the cellar.
He rose, and preceded by the host wringing his hands, and followed by Planchet with his musketoon ready for use, he approached the scene of action. The two gentlemen were exasperated. They had had a long ride, and were dying with hunger and thirst. "But this is tyranny," cried one of them in very good French, though with a foreign accent, "that this madman will not allow these good people access to their own wine. Nonsense, let us break open the door, and if he is too far gone in his madness, well, we will kill him." "Softly, gentlemen," said D'Artagnan, drawing his pistols from his belt. "You will kill nobody, if you please."
"Good, good,"
cried the calm voice of Athos from the other side of the door. "Let them just come in, these devourers of little children, and we shall see." Brave as they appeared to be, the two English gentlemen looked at each other hesitatingly. One might have thought there was in that cellar one of those famished ogres, the gigantic heroes of popular legends, into whose cavern nobody could force their way with impunity. There was a moment of silence. But at length the two Englishmen felt ashamed to draw back, and the angrier one descended the 5 or 6 steps which led to the cellar and gave a kick against the door, enough to split a wall. "Planchet," said D'Artagnan, cocking his pistols, "I will take charge of the one at the top. You look to the one below. Ah, gentlemen, you want battle, and you shall have it."
"Good God!"
cried the hollow voice of Athos.
"I can hear D'Artagnan, I think."
"Yes," cried D'Artagnan, raising his voice in turn. "I am here, my friend."
"Ah, good then," replied Athos. "We will teach them, these door-breakers."
The gentlemen had drawn their swords, but they found themselves taken between two fires. They still hesitated an instant, but as before, pride prevailed, and a second kick split the door from bottom to top.
"Stand on one side, D'Artagnan, stand on one side," cried Athos. "I am going to fire."
"Gentlemen," exclaimed D'Artagnan, whom reflection never abandoned, "gentlemen, think of what you are about. Patience, Athos. You are running your heads into a very silly affair. You will be riddled. My lackey and I will have 3 shots at you, and you will get as many from the cellar. You will then have our swords, with which I can assure you, my friend and I can play tolerably well. Let me conduct your business and my own. You shall soon have something to drink, I give you my word."
"If there is any left,"
grumbled the jeering voice of Athos. The host felt a cold sweat creep down his back.
"How, if there is any left?" murmured he.
"What the devil! There must be plenty left," replied D'Artagnan. "Be satisfied of that. These two cannot have drunk all the cellar. Gentlemen, return your swords to their scabbards." "Well, provided you replace your pistols in your belt." "Willingly." And D'Artagnan set the example. Then, turning toward Planchet, he made a sign to uncock his musketoon. The Englishmen, convinced of these peaceful proceedings, sheathed their swords grumblingly. The history of Athos's imprisonment was then related to them, and as they were really gentlemen, they pronounced the host in the wrong. "Now, gentlemen," said D'Artagnan, "go up to your room again, and in 10 minutes, I will answer for it, you shall have all you desire." The Englishman bowed and went upstairs. "Now I am alone, my dear Athos," said D'Artagnan. "Open the door, I beg of you."
"Instantly,"
said Athos. Then was heard a great noise of faggots being removed, and of the groaning of posts. These were the counterscarps and bastions of Athos, which the besieged himself demolished. An instant after, the broken door was removed, and the pale face of Athos appeared, who with a rapid glance took a survey of the surroundings. D'Artagnan threw himself on his neck and embraced him tenderly. He then tried to draw him from his moist abode, but to his surprise he perceived that Athos staggered. "You are wounded," said he.
"I? Not at all. I am dead drunk, that's all, and never did a man more strongly set about getting so. By the Lord, my good host, I must at least have drunk for my part 150 bottles." "Mercy!" cried the host. "If the lackey is drunk only half as much as the master, I am a ruined man." "Grimaud is a well-bred lackey. He would never think of faring in the same manner as his master. He only drank from the cask. Hark! I don't think he put the faucet in again. Do you hear it? It is running now." D'Artagnan burst into a laugh which changed the shiver of the host into a burning fever. In the meantime, Grimaud appeared in his turn behind his master, with the musketoon on his shoulder, and his head shaking, like one of those drunken satyrs in the pictures of Rubens. He was moistened before and behind with a greasy liquid which the host recognized as his best olive oil. The four crossed the public room and proceeded to take possession of the best apartment in the house, which D'Artagnan occupied with authority. In the meantime the host and his wife hurried down with lamps into the cellar, which had so long been interdicted to them and where a frightful spectacle awaited them. Beyond the fortifications through which Athos had made a breach in order to get out, and which were composed of faggots, planks, and empty casks, heaped up according to all the rules of the strategic art, they found, swimming in puddles of oil and wine, the bones and fragments of all the hams they had eaten, while a heap of broken bottles filled the whole left-hand corner of the cellar, and a tun, the cock of which was left running, was yielding by this means the last drop of its blood. The image of devastation and death, as the ancient poet says, reigned as over a field of battle. Of 50 large sausages suspended from the joists, scarcely 10 remained. Then the lamentations of the host and hostess pierced the vault of the cellar. D'Artagnan himself was moved by them. Athos did not even turn his head. To grief succeeded rage. The host armed himself with a spit and rushed into the chamber occupied by the two friends. "Some wine," said Athos on perceiving the host. "Some wine!" cried the stupefied host. "Some wine! Why, you have drunk more than 100 pistoles' worth. I am a ruined man, lost, destroyed." "Bah!" said Athos. "We were always dry." "If you had been contented with drinking, well and good, but you have broken all the bottles." "You pushed me upon a heap which rolled down. That was your fault." "All my oil is lost." "Oil is a sovereign balm for wounds, and my poor Grimaud here was obliged to dress those you had inflicted on him." "All my sausages are gnawed." "There is an enormous quantity of rats in that cellar." "You shall pay me for all this," cried the exasperated host. "Triple ass," said Athos, rising, but he sank down again immediately. He had tried his strength to the utmost. D'Artagnan came to his relief with his whip in his hand. The host drew back and burst into tears. "This will teach you," said D'Artagnan, "to treat the guests God sends you in a more courteous fashion." "God? Say the devil." "My dear friend," said D'Artagnan, "if you annoy us in this manner, we will all four go and shut ourselves up in your cellar, and we will see if the mischief is as great as you say." "Oh, gentlemen," said the host, "I have been wrong. I confess it, but pardon to every sin. You are gentlemen, and I am a poor innkeeper. You will have pity on me." "Ah, if you speak in that way," said Athos, "you will break my heart, and the tears will flow from my eyes as the wine flowed from the cask. We are not such devils as we appear to be. Come hither and let us talk." The host approached with hesitation. "Come hither, I say, and don't be afraid," continued Athos. "At the very moment when I was about to pay you, I had placed my purse on the table." "Yes, monsieur." "That purse contained 60 pistoles. Where is it?" "Deposited with the justice. They said it was bad money." "Very well. Get me my purse back and keep the 60 pistoles." But Monseigneur knows very well that justice never lets go that which it once lays hold of. If it were bad money, there might be some hopes, but unfortunately those were all good pieces. Manage the matter as well as you can, my good man. It does not concern me, the more so as I have not a livre left. Come, said D'Artagnan, let us inquire further. Athos's horse, where is that? In the stable. How much is it worth? 50 pistoles at most. It's worth 80. Take it, and there ends the matter. What? Cried Athos. Are you selling my horse, my Bajazet? And pray upon what shall I make my campaign? Upon Grimaud? I have brought you another, said D'Artagnan. Another? And a magnificent one, cried the host. Well, since there is another finer and younger, why, you may take the old one, and let us drink. What? asked the host, quite cheerful again. Some of that at the bottom, near the laths. There are 25 bottles of it left. All the rest were broken by my fall. Bring 6 of them. Why, this man is a cask, said the host aside. If he only remains here a fortnight and pays for what he drinks, I shall soon re-establish my business. And don't forget, said D'Artagnan, to bring up 4 bottles of the same sort for the 2 English gentlemen. And now, said Athos, while they bring the wine, tell me, D'Artagnan, what has become of the others? Come. D'Artagnan related how he had found Porthos in bed with a strained knee, and Aramis at a table between 2 theologians. As he finished, the host entered with the wine ordered and a ham which, fortunately for him, had been left out of the cellar. That's well, said Athos, filling his glass and that of his friend. Here's to Porthos and Aramis. But you, D'Artagnan, what is the matter with you, and what has happened to you personally? You have a sad air. Alas, said D'Artagnan, it has become I am the most unfortunate. Tell me. Presently, said D'Artagnan. Presently? And why presently? Because you think I am drunk? D'Artagnan, remember this. My ideas are never so clear as when I have had plenty of wine. Speak, then. I am all ears. D'Artagnan related his adventure with Madame Bonacieux. Athos listened to him without a frown, and when he had finished, said, Trifles, only trifles. That was his favorite word. You always say trifles, my dear Athos, said D'Artagnan, and that come very ill from you who have never loved. The drink-deadened eye of Athos flashed out, but only for a moment. It became as dull and vacant as before. That's true, said he quietly. For my part, I have never loved. Acknowledge, then, your stony heart, said D'Artagnan, that you are wrong to be so hard upon us tender hearts. Tender hearts, pierced hearts, said Athos. What do you say? I say that love is a lottery in which he who wins, wins death. You are very fortunate to have lost, believe me, my dear D'Artagnan, and if I have any counsel to give, it is always lose. She seemed to love me so. She seemed, did she? Oh, she did love me. You child, why, there is not a man who has not believed, as you do, that his mistress loved him, and there lives not a man who has not been deceived by his mistress. Except you, Athos, who never had one. That's true, said Athos after a moment's silence. That's true, I never had one. Let us drink. But then, philosopher that you are, said D'Artagnan, instruct me, support me. I stand in need of being taught and consoled. Consoled for what? For my misfortune. Your misfortune is laughable, said Athos, shrugging his shoulders. I should like to know what you would say if I were to relate to you a real tale of love.
Which has happened to you?
Or one of my friends, what matters?
Tell it, Athos, tell it.
Better if I drink.
Drink and relate, then.
Not a bad idea, said Athos, emptying and refilling his glass. The two things agree marvelously well.
I am all attention, said D'Artagnan.
Athos collected himself, and in proportion as he did so, D'Artagnan saw that he became pale. He was at that period of intoxication in which vulgar drinkers fall on the floor and go to sleep. He kept himself upright and dreamed without sleeping. This somnambulism of drunkenness had something frightful in it.
"You particularly wish it?" asked he.
"I pray for it," said D'Artagnan. "Be it then as you desire. One of my friends, please to observe, not myself," said Athos, interrupting himself with a melancholy smile. "One of the counts of my province, that is to say, of Berry, noble as a Dandolo or a Montmorency, at 25 years of age fell in love with a girl of 16, beautiful as fancy can paint. Through the ingenuousness of her age beamed an ardent mind, not of the woman, but of the poet. She did not please, she intoxicated. She lived in a small town with her brother, who was a curate. Both had recently come into the country. They came nobody knew whence, but when seeing her so lovely, and her brother so pious, nobody thought of asking whence they came. They were said, however, to be of good extraction. My friend, who was seigneur of the country, might have seduced her, or taken her by force at his will, for he was master. Who would have come to the assistance of two strangers, two unknown persons? Unfortunately, he was an honorable man. He married her. The fool! The ass! The idiot!"
"How so, if he love her?" asked D'Artagnan.
"Wait," said Athos. "He took her to his château, and made her the first lady in the province, and in justice it must be allowed that she supported her rank becomingly."
"Well?" asked D'Artagnan.
"Well, one day when she was hunting with her husband," continued Athos in a low voice and speaking very quickly, "she fell from her horse and fainted. The count flew to her to help, and as she appeared to be oppressed by her clothes, he ripped them open with his poniard, and in so doing laid bare her shoulder."
"D'Artagnan," said Athos, with a maniacal burst of laughter, "guess what she had on her shoulder."
"How can I tell?" said D'Artagnan.
"A fleur-de-lis," said Athos.
"She was branded."
Athos emptied at a single draught the glass he held in his hand.
"Horror!"
cried D'Artagnan. "What do you tell me?"
"Truth, my friend. The angel was a demon. The poor young girl had stolen the sacred vessels from a church."
"And what did the count do?"
"The count was of the highest nobility. He had on his estates the rights of high and low tribunals. He tore the dress of the countess to pieces. He tied her hands behind her, and hanged her on a tree."
"Heavens, Athos! A murder?" cried D'Artagnan.
"No less," said Athos, as pale as a corpse. "But methinks I need wine."
And he seized by the neck the last bottle that was left, put it to his mouth, and emptied it at a single draught, as he would have emptied an ordinary glass. Then he let his head sink upon his two hands, while D'Artagnan stood before him stupefied.
"That has cured me of beautiful, poetical, and loving women,"
said Athos after a considerable pause, raising his head and forgetting to continue the fiction of the count.
God grant you as much. Let us drink." Then she is dead?" stammered D'Artagnan. "Parbleu!" said Athos. "But hold out your glass. Some ham, my boy, or we can't drink."
"And her brother?" asked D'Artagnan, timidly.
"Her brother?" replied Athos.
"Yes, the priest."
"Oh, I inquired after him for the purpose of hanging him likewise. But he was beforehand with me. He had quit the curacy the night before."
"Was it ever known who this miserable fellow was?"
"He was doubtless the first lover and accomplice of the fair lady. A worthy man who had pretended to be a curate for the purpose of getting his mistress married, and securing her a position. He has been hanged and quartered, I hope."
My God!" cried D'Artagnan, quite stunned by the relation of this horrible adventure.
"Taste some of this ham, D'Artagnan. It is exquisite,"
said Athos, cutting a slice, which he placed on the young man's plate.
"What a pity it is there were only 4 like this in the cellar. I could have drunk 50 bottles more."
D'Artagnan could no longer endure this conversation, which had made him bewildered. Allowing his head to sink upon his 2 hands, he pretended to sleep.
"These young fellows can none of them drink," said Athos, looking at him with pity, "and yet this is one of the best."
End of chapter. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 28, The Return. D'Artagnan was astounded by the terrible confidence of Athos, yet many things appeared very obscure to him in this half-revelation. In the first place, it had been made by a man quite drunk to one who was half drunk, and yet, in spite of the uncertainty which the vapor of 3 or 4 bottles of Burgundy carries with it to the brain, D'Artagnan, when awaking on the following morning, had all the words of Athos as present to his memory as if they then fell from his mouth. They had been so impressed upon his mind. All this doubt only gave rise to a more lively desire of arriving at a certainty, and he went into his friend's chamber with a fixed determination of renewing the conversation of the preceding evening. But he found Athos quite himself again, that is to say, the most shrewd and impenetrable of men. Besides which, the Musketeer, after having exchanged a hearty shake of the hand with him, broached the matter first. "I was pretty drunk yesterday, D'Artagnan," said he. "I can tell that by my tongue, which was swollen and hot this morning, and by my pulse, which was very tremulous. I wager that I uttered 1,000 extravagances." While saying this, he looked at his friend with an earnestness that embarrassed him. "No," replied D'Artagnan. "If I collect well what you said, it was nothing out of the common way." "Ah, you surprise me. I thought I had told you a most lamentable story." And he looked at the young man as if he would read the bottom of his heart. "My faith," said D'Artagnan, "it appears that I was more drunk than you, since I remember nothing of the kind." Athos did not trust this reply, and he resumed. "You cannot have failed to remark, my dear friend, that everyone has his particular kind of drunkenness, sad or gay. My drunkenness is always sad, and when I am thoroughly drunk, my mania is to relate all the lugubrious stories which my foolish nurse inculcated into my brain. That is my failing. A capital failing, I admit, but with that exception, I am a good drinker." Athos spoke this in so natural a manner that D'Artagnan was shaken in his conviction. "It is that, then," replied the young man, anxious to find out the truth, "it is that, then, I remember as we remember a dream. We were speaking of hanging."
"Ah, You see how it is, said Athos, becoming still paler, but yet attempting to laugh. I was sure it was so. The hanging of people is my nightmare. Yes, replied D'Artagnan. I remember now. Yes, it was about... Oh, stop a minute. Yes, it was about a woman. That's it, replied Athos, becoming almost livid. That is my grand story of the fair lady, and when I relate that I must be very drunk. Yes, that was it, said D'Artagnan. The story of a tall, fair lady with blue eyes. Yes, who was hanged. By her husband, who was a nobleman of your acquaintance, continued D'Artagnan, looking intently at Athos. Well, you see how a man may compromise himself when he does not know what he says, replied Athos, shrugging his shoulders as if he thought himself an object of pity. I certainly never will get drunk again, D'Artagnan. It is too bad a habit. D'Artagnan remained silent, and then changing the conversation all at once, Athos said, By the by, I thank you for the horse you have brought me. Is it to your mind? asked D'Artagnan. Yes, but it is not a horse for hard work. You are mistaken. I rode him nearly 10 leagues in less than an hour and a half, and he appeared no more distressed than if he had only made the tour of the Place Saint-Sulpice. Ah, you begin to awaken my regret. Regret? Yes, I have parted with him. How? Why, here is the simple fact. This morning I awoke at 6 o'clock. You were still fast asleep, and I did not know what to do with myself. I was still stupid from our yesterday's debauch. As I came into the public room, I saw one of our Englishmen bargaining with a dealer for a horse, his own having died yesterday from bleeding. I drew near and found he was bidding 100 pistoles for a chestnut nag. Pardieu, said I, my good gentleman, I have a horse to sell too. Aye, and a very fine one. I saw him yesterday. Your friend's lackey was leading him. Do you think he is worth 100 pistoles? Yes, will you sell him to me for that sum? No, but I will play for him. What? At dice. No sooner said than done, and I lost the horse. Ah, but please to observe I won back the equipage, cried Athos. D'Artagnan looked much disconcerted. This vexes you? said Athos. Well, I confess it does, replied D'Artagnan. That horse was to have identified us in the day of battle. It was a pledge, a remembrance. Athos, you have done wrong. But, my dear friend, put yourself in my place, replied the Musketeer. I was hipped to death, and still further, upon my honor, I don't like English horses. If it is only to be recognized, why, the saddle will suffice for that. It is quite remarkable enough. As to the horse, we can easily find some excuse for its disappearance. Why the devil? A horse is mortal. Suppose mine had had the glanders or the farcy. D'Artagnan did not smile. It vexes me greatly, continued Athos, that you attach so much importance to these animals, for I am not yet at the end of my story. What else have you done? After having lost my own horse 9 against 10, see how near, I formed an idea of staking yours. Yes, but you stopped at the idea, I hope. No, for I put it in execution that very minute. And the consequence? Said D'Artagnan in great anxiety. I threw, and I lost. What, my horse? Your horse, 7 against 8, a point short. You know the proverb. Athos, you are not in your right senses, I swear. My dear lad, that was yesterday. When I was telling you silly stories, it was proper to tell me that, and not this morning. I lost him then, with all his appointments and furniture. Really, this is frightful. Stop a minute. You don't know all yet. I should make an excellent gambler if I were not too hot-headed. But I was hot-headed, just as if I had been drinking. Well, I was not hot-headed then. Well, But what else could you play for? You had nothing left?" "Oh, yes, my friend. There was still that diamond left which sparkles on your finger, and which I had observed yesterday." "This diamond?" said D'Artagnan, placing his hand eagerly on his ring. "And as I am a connoisseur in such things, having had a few of my own once, I estimated it at 1,000 pistoles." "I hope," said D'Artagnan, half dead with fright, "you made no mention of my diamond?" "On the contrary, my dear friend, this diamond became our only resource. With it I might regain our horses and their harnesses, and even money to pay our expenses on the road." "Athos, you make me tremble!" cried D'Artagnan. "I mentioned your diamond then to my adversary, who had likewise remarked it. What the devil, my dear, do you think you can wear a star from heaven on your finger and nobody observe it? Impossible!" Go on, my dear fellow," said D'Artagnan, "for upon my honor you will kill me with your indifference." "We divided, then, this diamond into 10 parts of 100 pistoles each." "You are laughing at me and want to try me," said D'Artagnan, whose anger began to take by the hair, as Minerva takes Achilles in the Iliad. "No, I do not jest, mordieu. I should like to have seen you in my place. I had been 15 days without seeing a human face, and had been left to brutalize myself in the company of bottles." "That was no reason for staking my diamond," replied D'Artagnan, closing his hand with a nervous spasm. "Hear the end. 10 parts of 100 pistoles each, in 10 throws, without revenge. In 13 throws I had lost all. In 13 throws. The number 13 was always fatal to me. It was on the 13th of July that—" "Ventre bleu!" cried D'Artagnan, rising from the table, the story of the present day making him forget that of the preceding one. "Patience," said Athos. "I had a plan. The Englishman was an original. I had seen him conversing that morning with Grimaud, and Grimaud had told me that he had made him proposals to enter into his service. I staked Grimaud, the silent Grimaud, divided into 10 portions." "Well, what next?" said D'Artagnan, laughing in spite of himself. "Grimaud himself, understand, and with the 10 parts of Grimaud, which are not worth a ducatoon, I regained the diamond. Tell me now if persistence is not a virtue." "My faith, but this is droll!" cried D'Artagnan, consoled and holding his sides with laughter. "You may guess, finding the luck turn, that I again staked the diamond." "The devil!" said D'Artagnan, becoming angry again. "I won back your harness, then your horse, then my harness, then my horse, and then I lost again. In brief, I regained your harness and then mine. That's where we are. That was a superb throw, so I left off there." D'Artagnan breathed as if the whole hostelry had been removed from his breast. "Then the diamond is safe?" said he timidly. "Intact, my dear friend, besides the harness of your Bucephalus and mine." "And what is the use of harnesses without horses?" "I have an idea about them." "Athos, you make me shudder." "Listen to me. You have not played for a long time, D'Artagnan." "And I have no inclination to play." "Swear to nothing. You have not played for a long time, I said. You ought then to have a good hand." "Well, what then?" "Well, the Englishman and his companion are still here. I remarked that he regretted the horse furniture very much. You appear to think much of your horse. In your place, I would stake the furniture against the horse." "But he will not wish for only one harness." "Stake both, pardieu! I am not selfish as you are." "You would do so?" said D'Artagnan, undecided, so strongly did the confidence of Athos begin to prevail, in spite of himself. "On my honor, in one single throw." "But having lost the horses, I am particularly anxious to preserve the harnesses." "Stake your diamond, then." "This? That's another matter." "Never, never." "The devil!" said Athos. "I would propose to you to stake Planchet, but as that has already been done, the Englishman would not perhaps be willing."
Decidedly, my dear Athos, said D'Artagnan, I should like better not to risk anything. That's a pity, said Athos coolly. The Englishman is overflowing with pistoles. Good Lord, try one throw. One throw is soon made. And if I lose? You will win. But if I lose? Well, you will surrender the harnesses. Have with you for one throw, said D'Artagnan. Athos went in quest of the Englishman, whom he found in the stable, examining the harnesses with a greedy eye. The opportunity was good. He proposed the conditions: the 2 harnesses, either against 1 horse or 100 pistoles. The Englishman calculated fast. The 2 harnesses were worth 300 pistoles. He consented. D'Artagnan threw the dice with a trembling hand, and turned up the number 3. His paleness terrified Athos, who, however, consented himself with saying, "That's a sad throw, comrade. You will have the horses fully equipped, monsieur." The Englishman, quite triumphant, did not even give himself the trouble to shake the dice. He threw them on the table without looking at them, so sure was he of victory. D'Artagnan turned aside to conceal his ill humor. "Hold, hold, hold," said Athos with his quiet tone. "That throw of the dice is extraordinary. I have not seen such a one 4 times in my life. 2 aces." The Englishman looked and was seized with astonishment. D'Artagnan looked and was seized with pleasure. "Yes," continued Athos, 4 times only, once at the house of Monsieur Criquet, another time at my own house in the country, in my chateau when I had a chateau, a 3rd time at Monsieur de Tréville's, where it surprised us all, and the 4th time at a cabaret, where it fell to my lot and where I lost 100 louis and a supper on it. "Then Monsieur takes his horse back again," said the Englishman. "Certainly," said D'Artagnan. "Then there is no revenge?" "Our conditions said, no revenge, you will please to recollect." "That is true. The horse shall be restored to your lackey, monsieur." "A moment," said Athos. "With your permission, monsieur, I wish to speak a word with my friend." "Say on." Athos drew D'Artagnan aside. "Well, tempter, what more do you want with me?" said D'Artagnan. "You want me to throw again, do you not?" "No, I would wish you to reflect." "On what?" "You mean to take your horse?" "Without doubt." "You are wrong, then. I would take the 100 pistoles. You know you have staked the harnesses against the horse or 100 pistoles at your choice." "Yes." "Well, then, I repeat, you are wrong. What is the use of 1 horse for us 2? I could not ride behind. We should look like the 2 sons of Anmon, who had lost their brother. You cannot think of humiliating me by prancing along by my side on that magnificent charger. For my part, I should not hesitate a moment. I should take the 100 pistoles. We want money for our return to Paris." "I am much attached to that horse, Athos." "And there again you are wrong. A horse slips and injures a joint. A horse stumbles and breaks his knees to the bone. A horse eats out of a manger in which a glandered horse has eaten. There is a horse, while on the contrary, the 100 pistoles feed their master." "But how shall we get back?" "Upon our lackeys' horses, pardieu. Anybody may see by our bearing that we are people of condition." "Pretty figures we shall cut on ponies while Aramis and Porthos caracole on their steeds." "Aramis! Porthos!" cried Athos, and laughed aloud. "What is it?" asked D'Artagnan, who did not at all comprehend the hilarity of his friend. "Nothing, nothing. Go on." "Your advice, then?" "To take the 100 pistoles, D'Artagnan. With the 100 pistoles we can live well to the end of the month. We have undergone a great deal of fatigue, remember, and a little rest will do no harm." "I rest? Oh, no, Athos. Once in Paris, I shall prosecute my search for that unfortunate woman." "Well, you may be assured that your horse will not be half so serviceable to you for that purpose as good golden louis. Take the 100 pistoles, my friend.
Take the 100 pistoles."
D'Artagnan only required one reason to be satisfied. This last reason appeared convincing. Besides, he feared that by resisting longer he should appear selfish in the eyes of Athos. He acquiesced, therefore, and chose the 100 pistoles, which the Englishman paid down on the spot. They then determined to depart. Peace with the landlord, in addition to Athos's old horse, cost 6 pistoles. D'Artagnan and Athos took the nags of Planchet and Grimaud, and the 2 lackeys started on foot, carrying the saddles on their heads. However ill our 2 friends were mounted, they were soon far in advance of their servants, and arrived at Crèvecoeur. From a distance they perceived Aramis, seated in a melancholy manner at his window, looking out, like Sister Anne, at the dust on the horizon.
"Hola, Aramis! What the devil are you doing there?" cried the 2 friends.
"Ah, is that you, D'Artagnan, and you, Athos?" said the young man. "I was reflecting upon the rapidity with which the blessing of this world leave us. My English horse, which has just disappeared amid a cloud of dust, has furnished me with a living image of the fragility of the things of the earth. Life itself may be resolved into 3 words: erat, est, fuit."
"Which means,"
said D'Artagnan, who began to suspect the truth,
"which means that I have just been duped 60 louis for a horse which by the manner of his gait can do at least 5 leagues an hour."
D'Artagnan and Athos laughed aloud.
"My dear D'Artagnan," said Aramis, "don't be too angry with me, I beg. Necessity has no law. Besides, I am the person punished, as that rascally horse-dealer has robbed me of 50 louis, at least. Ah, you fellows are good managers. You ride on our lackeys' horses, and have your own gallant steeds led along carefully by hand at short stages."
At the same instant a market cart, which some minutes before had appeared upon the Amiens road, pulled up at the inn, and Planchet and Grimaud came out of it with the saddles on their heads. The cart was returning empty to Paris, and the 2 lackeys had agreed, for their transport, to slake the wagoner's thirst along the route.
"What is this?" said Aramis, on seeing them arrive. "Nothing but saddles?"
"Now do you understand?" said Athos.
"My friends, that's exactly like me. I retain my harness by instinct. Hola, Bazin! Bring my new saddle and carry it along with those of these gentlemen."
"And what have you done with your ecclesiastics?" asked D'Artagnan.
"My dear fellow, I invited them to a dinner the next day," replied Aramis. "They have some capital wine here. Please to observe that in passing. I did my best to make them drunk. Then the curate forbade me to quit my uniform, and the Jesuit entreated me to get him made a Musketeer." "Without a thesis?" cried D'Artagnan. "Without a thesis? I demand the suppression of the thesis."
"Since then," continued Aramis, "I have lived very agreeably. I have begun a poem in verses of 1 syllable.
That is rather difficult, but the merit in all things consists in the difficulty. The matter is gallant. I will read you the first canto. It is 400 lines and lasts a minute." "My faith, my dear Aramis," said D'Artagnan, who detested verses almost as much as he did Latin, "add to the merit of the difficulty that of the brevity, and you are sure that your poem will at least have 2 merits."
"You will see," continued Aramis, "that it breathes irreproachable passion. And so, my friends, we return to Paris? Bravo! I am ready. We are going to rejoin that good fellow Porthos. So much the better. You can't think how I have missed him, the great simpleton. To see him so self-satisfied reconciles me with myself. He would not sell his horse, not for a kingdom. I think I can see him now, mounted upon his superb animal, and seated in his handsome saddle. I am sure he will look like the Great Mogul." They made a halt for an hour to refresh their horses. Aramis discharged his bill, placed Bazin in the cart with his comrades, and they set forward to join Porthos. They found him up, less pale than when D'Artagnan left him after his first visit, and seated at a table on which, though he was alone, was spread enough for 4 persons. This dinner consisted of meats nicely dressed, choice wines, and superb fruit.
"Ah, pardieu!" said he, rising. "You come in the nick of time, gentlemen. I was just beginning the soup, and you will dine with me."
"Oh, oh!" said D'Artagnan. "Mousqueton has not caught these bottles with his lasso. Besides, here is a piquant fricandeau and a fillet of beef."
"I am recruiting myself," said Porthos. "I am recruiting myself. Nothing weakens a man more than these devilish strains. Did you ever suffer from a strain, Athos?" "Never. Though I remember in our affair of the Rue Férou, I received a sword wound which at the end of 15 or 18 days produced the same effect." "But this dinner was not intended for you alone, Porthos?" said Aramis. "No," said Porthos. "I expected some gentlemen of the neighborhood, who have just sent me word that they could not come. You will take their places, and I shall not lose by the exchange. Hola, Mousqueton, seats, and order double the bottles."
"Do you know what we are eating here?" said Athos at the end of 10 minutes.
"Pardieu!"
replied D'Artagnan. "For my part, I am eating veal garnished with shrimps and vegetables."
"And I some lamb chops," said Porthos.
"And I a plain chicken," said Aramis.
"You are all mistaken, gentlemen," answered Athos gravely.
"You are eating horse."
"Eating what?"
said D'Artagnan.
"Horse,"
said Aramis with a grimace of disgust. Porthos alone made no reply.
"Yes, horse. Are we not eating a horse, Porthos? And perhaps his saddle therewith." "No, gentlemen, I have kept the harness," said Porthos.
"My faith," said Aramis, "we are all alike. One would think we had tipped the wink."
"What could I do?" said Porthos. "This horse made my visitors ashamed of theirs, and I don't like to humiliate people."
"Then your duchess is still at the waters?" asked D'Artagnan.
"Still," replied Porthos. "And my faith, the governor of the province, one of the gentlemen I expected today, seemed to have such a wish for him that I gave him to him."
"Gave him?" cried D'Artagnan.
"My God, yes! Gave, that is the word," said Porthos. "For the animal was worth at least 150 louis, and the stingy fellow would only give me 80.
"Without the saddle?" said Aramis.
"Yes, without the saddle."
"You will observe, gentlemen," said Athos, "that Porthos has made the best bargain of any of us." And then commenced a roar of laughter in which they all joined, to the astonishment of poor Porthos, but when he was informed of the cause of their hilarity, he shared it vociferously according to his custom. "There is one comfort, we are all in cash," said D'Artagnan.
"Well, for my part," said Athos,
"I found Aramis's Spanish wine so good that I sent on a hamper of 60 bottles of it in the wagon with the lackeys. That has weakened my purse." "And I," said Aramis, "imagined that I had given almost my last sou to the church of Montdidier and the Jesuits of Amiens, with whom I had made engagements which I ought to have kept. I have ordered masses for myself and for you, gentlemen, which will be said, gentlemen, for which I have not the least doubt you will be marvelously benefited."
"And I," said Porthos, "do you think my strain cost me nothing?
Without reckoning Mousqueton's wound, for which I had to have the surgeon twice a day, and who charged me double on account of that foolish Mousqueton having allowed himself a ball in a part which people generally only show to an apothecary, so I advised him to try never to get wounded there any more."
"Aye, aye," said Athos, exchanging a smile with D'Artagnan and Aramis. "It is very clear you acted nobly with regard to the poor lad. That is like a good master."
"In short," said Porthos, "when all my expenses are paid, I shall have at most 30 crowns left."
"And I about 10 pistoles," said Aramis.
"Well, then it appears that we are the Croesuses of the society. How much have you left of your 100 pistoles, D'Artagnan?"
"Of my 100 pistoles? Why, in the first place, I gave you 50.
"You think so?"
"Pardieu!" Ah, that is true. I recollect. Then I paid the host 6. What a brute of a host! Why did you give him 6 pistoles? You told me to give them to him. It is true. I am too good-natured. In brief, how much remains? 25 pistoles, said D'Artagnan. And I, said Athos, taking some small change from his pocket, you? Nothing! My faith, so little that it is not worth reckoning with the general stock. Now then, let us calculate how much we possess in all. Porthos? 30 crowns. Aramis? 10 pistoles. And you, D'Artagnan? 25. That makes in all, said Athos. 475 livres, said D'Artagnan, who reckoned like Archimedes. On our arrival in Paris, we shall still have 400, besides the harnesses, said Porthos. But our troop horses, said Aramis. Well, of the 4 horses of our lackeys, we will make 2 for the masters, for which we will draw lots. With the 400 livres, we will make the half of 1 for one of the unmounted, and then we will give the turnings out of our pockets to D'Artagnan, who has a steady hand, and will go and play in the first gaming-house we come to. There. Let us dine, then, said Porthos. It is getting cold. The friends, at ease with regard to the future, did honor to the repast, and the remains of which were abandoned to Mousqueton, Bazin, Planchet, and Grimaud. On arriving in Paris, D'Artagnan found a letter from Monsieur de Tréville, which informed him that, at his request, the king had promised that he should enter the company of the Musketeers. As this was the height of D'Artagnan's worldly ambition, apart, be it well understood, from his desire of finding Madame Bonacieux, he ran full of joy to seek his comrades, whom he had left only half an hour before, but whom he found very sad and deeply preoccupied. They were assembled in council at the residence of Athos, which always indicated an event of some gravity. Monsieur de Tréville had intimated to them His Majesty's fixed intention to open the campaign on the 1st of May, and they must immediately prepare their outfits. The 4 philosophers looked at one another in a state of bewilderment. Monsieur de Tréville never jested in matters relating to discipline. "And what do you reckon your outfit will cost?" said D'Artagnan. "Oh, we can scarcely say. We have made our calculations with Spartan economy, and we each require 1,500 livres. 4 times 15 makes 60. 6,000 livres," said Athos. "It seems to me," said D'Artagnan, "with 1,000 livres each, I do not speak as a Spartan but as a procurator." The word procurator roused Porthos. "Stop!" said he. "I have an idea." "Well, that's something, for I have not the shadow of one," said Athos coolly. "But as to D'Artagnan, gentlemen, the idea of belonging to ours has driven him out of his senses. 1,000 livres! For my part, I declare I want 2,000. 4 times 2 makes 8, then said Aramis. "It is 8,000 that we want to complete our outfits, toward which, it is true, we have already the saddles." "Besides," said Athos, waiting till D'Artagnan, who went to thank Monsieur de Tréville, had shut the door. "Besides, there is that beautiful ring which beams from the finger of our friend. What the devil! D'Artagnan is too good a comrade to leave his brothers in embarrassment while he wears the ransom of a king on his finger." End of chapter.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recorded by Astrea Odensdottir, springygoddess.livejournal.com, July 2006. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 29. Hunting for the Equipments. The most preoccupied of the 4 friends was certainly D'Artagnan, although he, in his quality of guardsman, would be much more easily equipped than Monsieur the Musketeers, who were all of high rank, but our Gascon cadet was, as may have been observed, of a provident and almost avaricious character, and with that explain the contradiction, so vain as almost to rival Porthos. To this preoccupation of his vanity, D'Artagnan at this moment joined an uneasiness much less selfish. Notwithstanding all his inquiries respecting Madame Bonacieux, he could obtain no intelligence of her. Monsieur de Tréville had spoken of her to the Queen. The Queen was ignorant where the mercer's young wife was, but had promised to have her sought for, but this promise was very vague and did not at all reassure D'Artagnan. Athos did not leave his chamber. He made up his mind not to take a single step to equip himself. "We have still 15 days before us," said he to his friends. "Well, if at the end of a fortnight I have found nothing, or rather, if nothing has come to find me, as I, too good a Catholic to kill myself with a pistol bullet, I will seek a good quarrel with 4 of his Eminence's guards, or with 8 Englishmen, and I will fight until one of them has killed me, which, considering the number, cannot fail to happen. It will then be said of me that I died for the king, so that I shall have performed my duty without the expense of an outfit." Porthos continued to walk about with his hands behind him, tossing his head and repeating, "I shall follow up on my idea." Aramis, anxious and negligently dressed, said nothing. It may be seen by these disastrous details that desolation reigned in the community. The lackeys, on their part, like the coursers of Hippolytus, shared the sadness of their masters. Mousqueton collected a store of crusts. Bazin, who had always been inclined to devotion, never quit the churches. Planchet watched the flight of flies, and Grimaud, whom the general distress could not induce to break the silence imposed by his master, heaved sighs enough to soften the stones. The 3 friends, for, as we have said, Athos had sworn not to stir a foot to equip himself, went out early in the morning and returned late at night. They wandered about the streets, looking at the pavement as if to see whether the passengers had not left a purse behind them. They might have been supposed to be following tracks, so observant were they wherever they went. When they met, they looked desolately at one another, as much as to say, "Have you found anything?" However, as Porthos had first found an idea, and had thought of it earnestly afterward, he was the first to act. He was a man of execution, this worthy Porthos. D'Artagnan perceived him one day walking toward the church of Saint-Leu, and followed him instinctively. He entered, after having twisted his mustache and elongated his imperial, which always announced on his part the most triumphant resolutions. As D'Artagnan took some precautions to conceal himself, Porthos believed he had not been seen. D'Artagnan entered behind him. Porthos went and leaned against the side of a pillar. D'Artagnan, still unperceived, supported himself against the other side. There happened to be a sermon which made the church very full of people. Porthos took advantage of this circumstance to ogle the women. Thanks to the cares of Mousqueton, the exterior was far from announcing the distress of the interior. His hat was a little napless, his feather was a little faded, his gold lace was a little tarnished, his laces were a trifle frayed, but in the obscurity of the church these things were not seen, and Porthos was still the handsome Porthos. D'Artagnan observed, on the bench nearest to the pillar against which Porthos leaned, a sort of ripe beauty, rather yellow and rather dry, but erect and haughty under her black hood. The eyes of Porthos were furtively cast upon this lady, and then roved about at large over the nave. On her side, the lady, who from time to time blushed, darted with the rapidity of lightning a glance toward the inconstant Porthos, and then immediately the eyes of Porthos wandered anxiously. It was plain that this mode of proceeding piqued the lady in the black hood, for she bit her lips till they bled, scratched the end of her nose, and could not sit still in her seat. Porthos, seeing this, retwisted his moustache, elongated his imperial a second time, and began to make signals to a beautiful lady who was near the choir, and who not only was a beautiful lady, but still further, no doubt, a great lady, for she had behind her a negro boy who had brought the cushion on which she knelt, and a female servant who held the emblazoned bag, in which was placed the book from which she read the Mass. The lady with the black hood followed through all their wanderings the looks of Porthos, and perceived that they rested upon the lady with the velvet cushion, the little negro, and the maidservant. During this time Porthos played close. It was almost imperceptible motions of his eyes, fingers placed upon the lips, little assassinating smiles which really did assassinate the disdained beauty. Then she cried, "Ahem!" under cover of the mea culpa, striking her breast so vigorously that everybody, even the lady with the red cushion, turned round toward her. Porthos paid no attention. Nevertheless, he understood it all, but was deaf. The lady with the red cushion produced a great effect, for she was very handsome, upon the lady with the black hood, who saw in her a rival really to be dreaded. A great effect upon Porthos, who thought her much prettier than the lady with the black hood. A great effect upon D'Artagnan, who recognized in her the lady of Meung, of Calais, and of Dover, whom his persecutor, the man with the scar, had saluted by the name of Milady. D'Artagnan, without losing sight of the lady of the red cushion, continued to watch the proceedings of Porthos, which amused him greatly. He guessed that the lady of the black hood was the procurator's wife of the Rue aux Ours, which was the more probable from the church of St. Leu being not far from that locality. He guessed, likewise, by induction, that Porthos was taking his revenge for the defeat of Chantilly, when the procurator's wife had proved so refractory with respect to her purse. Amid all this, D'Artagnan remarked also that not one countenance responded to the gallantries of Porthos. There were only chimeras and illusions, but for real love, for true jealousy, is there any reality except illusions and chimeras? The sermon over, the procurator's wife advanced toward the holy font. Porthos went before her, and, instead of a finger, dipped his whole hand in. The procurator's wife smiled, thinking that it was for her Porthos had put himself to this trouble. But she was cruelly and promptly undeceived. When she was only about 3 steps from him, he turned his head round, fixing his eyes steadfastly upon the lady with the red cushion, who had risen and was approaching, followed by her black boy and her woman. When the lady of the red cushion came close to Porthos, Porthos drew his dripping hand from the font. The fair worshipper touched the great hand of Porthos with her delicate fingers, smiled, made the sign of the cross, and left the church. This was too much for the procurator's wife. She doubted not there was an intrigue between this lady and Porthos. If she had been a great lady, she would have fainted. But as she was only a procurator's wife, she contented herself saying to the Musketeer with concentrated fury, "Eh, Monsieur Porthos, you don't offer me any holy water?" Porthos, at the sound of that voice, started like a man awakened from a sleep of 100 years. "Madame," cried he, "is that you? How is your husband, our dear Monsieur Coquenard? Is he still as stingy as ever? Where can my eyes have been not to have seen you during the 2 hours of the sermon?" "I was within 2 paces of you, monsieur," replied the procurator's wife, "but you did not perceive me, because you had no eyes but for the pretty lady to whom you just now gave the holy water." Porthos pretended to be confused. "Ah," said he, "you have remarked? I must have been blind not to have seen." "Yes," said Porthos, "that is a duchess of my acquaintance whom I have great trouble to meet on account of the jealousy of her husband, and who sent me word that she should come today to this poor church, buried in this vile quarter, solely for the sake of seeing me. Monsieur Porthos, said the procurator's wife, will you have the kindness to offer me your arm for 5 minutes? I have something to say to you. Certainly, madame, said Porthos, winking to himself, as a gambler does, who laughs at the dupe he is about to pluck. At that moment, D'Artagnan passed in pursuit of Milady. He cast a passing glance at Porthos and beheld this triumphant look. Eh, said he, reasoning to himself, according to the strangely easy morality of that gallant period, there is one who will be equipped in good time. Porthos, yielding to the pressure of the arm of the procurator's wife, as a bark yields to the rudder, arrived at the cloister Saint Magloire, a little frequented passage enclosed with a turnstile at each end. In the daytime nobody was seen there but mendicants devouring their crusts, and children at play. "Ah, Monsieur Porthos," cried the procurator's wife, when she was assured that no one who was a stranger to the population of the locality could either see or hear her. "Ah, Monsieur Porthos, you are a great conqueror, as it appears." "I, madame?" said Porthos, drawing himself up proudly. "How so?" "The signs just now, and the holy water. But that must be a princess at least, that lady with her Negro boy and her maid." "My God, madame, you are deceived," said Porthos. "She is simply a duchess." "And that running footman who waited at the door?" "And that carriage with a coachman in grand livery who sat waiting on his seat." Porthos had seen neither the footman nor the carriage, but with the eye of a jealous woman, Madame Coquenard had seen everything. Porthos regretted that he had not at once made the lady of the red cushion a princess. "Ah, you are quite the pet of the ladies, Monsieur Porthos," resumed the procurator's wife with a sigh. "Well," responded Porthos, "you may imagine, with the physique with which nature has endowed me, I am not in want of good luck." "Good Lord, how quickly men forget!" cried the procurator's wife, raising her eyes toward heaven. "Less quickly than the women, it seems to me," replied Porthos. "For I, madame, I may say I was your victim. When wounded, dying, I was abandoned by the surgeons. I, the offspring of a noble family, who placed reliance upon your friendship, I was near dying of my wounds at first, and of hunger afterward, in a beggarly inn at Chantilly, without you ever deigning once to reply to the burning letters I addressed to you." "But, Monsieur Porthos," murmured the procurator's wife, who began to feel that, to judge by the conduct of the great ladies of the time, she was wrong. "I, who had sacrificed for you the Baronne de—" "I know it well. The Comtesse de—" "Monsieur Porthos, be generous." "You are right, madame, and I will not finish." "But it was my husband who would not hear of lending." "Madame Coquenard," said Porthos, "remember the first letter you wrote me, and which I preserve engraved in my memory." The procurator's wife uttered a groan. "Besides," said she, "the sum you required me to borrow was rather large." "Madame Coquenard, I gave you the preference. I had but to write to the Duchess, but I won't repeat her name, for I am incapable of compromising a woman. But this I know, that I had but to write to her, and she would have sent me 1,500. The procurator's wife shed a tear. "Monsieur Porthos," said she, "I can assure you that you have severely punished me, and if in the time to come you should find yourself in a similar situation, you have but to apply to me." "Fie, madame, fie," said Porthos, as if disgusted. "Let us not talk about money, if you please. It is humiliating." "Then you no longer love me," said the procurator's wife, slowly and sadly. Porthos maintained a majestic silence. "And that is the only reply you make? Alas, I understand." "Think of the offense you have committed toward me, madame." "It remains here," said Porthos, placing his hand on his heart and pressing it strongly. "I will repair it. Indeed I will, my dear Porthos. Besides, what did I ask of you? Resumed Porthos, with a movement of the shoulders, full of good fellowship. Alone, nothing more. After all, I am not an unreasonable man. I know you are not rich, Madame Coquenard, and that your husband is obliged to bleed his poor clients, to squeeze a few paltry crowns from them. Oh, if you were a duchess, a marchioness, or a countess, it would be quite a different thing. It would be unpardonable. The procurator's wife was piqued. Pleased to know, Monsieur Porthos, said she, that my strong box, the strong box of a procurator's wife, though it may be, is better filled than those of your affected minxes. That doubles the offence, said Porthos, disengaging his arm from that of the procurator's wife. For if you are rich, Madame Coquenard, then there is no excuse for your refusal. When I said rich, replied the procurator's wife, who saw that she had gone too far, you must not take the word literally. I am not precisely rich, though I am pretty well off. Hold, madame, said Porthos. Let us say no more upon the subject, I beg of you. You have misunderstood me. All sympathy is extinct between us. Ingrate that you are. Ah, I advise you to complain, said Porthos. Begone, then, to your beautiful duchess. I will detain you no longer, and she is not to be despised, in my opinion. Now, Monsieur Porthos, once more, and this is the last. Do you love me still? Ah, madame, said Porthos, in the most melancholy tone he could assume, when we are about to enter upon a campaign in which my presentiments tell me I shall be killed. Oh, don't talk of such things, cried the procurator's wife, bursting into tears. Something whispers me so, continued Porthos, becoming more and more melancholy. Rather say that you have a new love. Not so. I speak frankly to you. No object affects me, and I even feel here at the bottom of my heart something which speaks for you. But in 15 days, as you know, or as you do not know, this fatal campaign is to open. I shall be fearfully preoccupied with my outfit. Then I must make a journey to see my family in the lower part of Brittany to obtain the sum necessary for my departure. Porthos observed a last struggle between love and avarice. And as, continued he, the duchess whom you saw at the church has estates near to those of my family, we mean to make the journey together. Journeys, you know, appear much shorter when we travel two in company. Have you no friends in Paris, then, Monsieur Porthos? Said the procurator's wife. I thought I had, said Porthos, resuming his melancholy air, but I have been taught my mistake. You have some, cried the procurator's wife, in a transport that surprised even herself. Come to our house tomorrow. You are the son of my aunt, consequently my cousin. You come from Noyon in Picardy. You have several lawsuits and no attorney. Can you recollect all that? Perfectly, madame. Come at dinner time. Very well. And be upon your guard before my husband, who is rather shrewd, notwithstanding his 76 years. 76 years? Peste, that's a fine age, replied Porthos. A great age, you mean, Monsieur Porthos. Yes, the poor man may be expected to leave me a widow any hour, continued she, throwing a significant glance at Porthos. Fortunately, by our marriage contract, the survivor takes everything. All? Yes, all. You are a woman of precaution, I see, my dear Madame Coquenard, said Porthos, squeezing the hand of the procurator's wife tenderly. We are then reconciled, dear Monsieur Porthos? Said she, simpering. For life, replied Porthos, in the same manner. Till we meet again, then, dear traitor. Till we meet again, my forgetful charmer. Tomorrow, my angel. Tomorrow, flame of my life. End of chapter 29.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Kevin Kivico. The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 30. D'Artagnan and the Englishman. D'Artagnan followed Milady without being perceived by her. He saw her get into her carriage and heard her order the coachman to drive to Saint-Germain. It was useless to try to keep pace on foot with a carriage drawn by two powerful horses. D'Artagnan, therefore, returned to the Rue Férou. In the Rue de Seine he met Planchet, who had stopped before the house of a pastry cook, and was contemplating with ecstasy a cake of the most appetizing appearance. He ordered him to go and saddle 2 horses in Monsieur de Tréville's stables, one for himself, D'Artagnan, and one for Planchet, and bring them to Athos's place. Once for all, Tréville had placed his stable at D'Artagnan's service. Planchet proceeded toward the Rue du Colombier, and D'Artagnan toward the Rue Férou. Athos was at home, emptying sadly a bottle of the famous Spanish wine he had brought back with him from his journey into Picardy. He made a sign for Grimaud to bring a glass for D'Artagnan, and Grimaud obeyed as usual. D'Artagnan related to Athos all that had passed at the church between Porthos and the procurator's wife, and how their comrade was probably by that time in a fair way to be equipped. "As for me," replied Athos in his recital, "I am quite at my ease. It will not be women that will defray the expense of my outfit." "Handsome, well-bred, noble lord as you are, my dear Athos, neither princesses nor queens would be secure from your amorous solicitations." "How young this D'Artagnan is," said Athos, shrugging his shoulders, and he made a sign to Grimaud to bring another bottle. At that moment Planchet put his head modestly in at the half-open door and told his master that the horses were ready. "What horses?" asked Athos. "2 horses that Monsieur de Tréville lends me at my pleasure, and with which I am now going to take a ride to Saint-Germain." "Well, and what are you going to do at Saint-Germain, then?" demanded Athos. Then D'Artagnan described the meeting which he had at the church, and how he had found that lady who, with the seigneur in the black cloak, and with the scar near his temple, filled his mind constantly. "That is to say, you are in love with this lady as you were with Madame Bonacieux," said Athos, shrugging his shoulders contemptuously, as if he pitied human weakness. "I? Not at all," said D'Artagnan. "I am only curious to unravel the mystery to which she is attached. I do not know why, but I imagine that this woman, wholly unknown to me as she is, and wholly unknown to her as I am, has an influence over my life." "Well, perhaps you are right," said Athos. "I do not know a woman that is worth the trouble of being sought for when she is once lost. Madame Bonacieux is lost, so much the worse for her if she is found." "No, Athos, no, you are mistaken," said D'Artagnan. "I love my poor Constance more than ever, and if I knew the place in which she is, were it at the end of the world, I would go to free her from the hands of her enemies. But I am ignorant. All my researches have been useless. What is to be said? I must divert my attention." "Amuse yourself with Milady, my dear D'Artagnan. I wish you may with all my heart, if that will amuse you." "Hear me, Athos," said D'Artagnan. "Instead of shutting yourself up here as if you were under arrest, get on horseback and come and take a ride with me to Saint-Germain." "My dear fellow," said Athos, "I ride horses when I have any. When I have none, I go afoot." "Well," said D'Artagnan, smiling at the misanthropy of Athos, which from any other person would have offended him, "I ride what I can get. I am not so proud as you. So au revoir, dear Athos." "Au revoir," said the Musketeer, making a sign to Grimaud to uncork the bottle he had just brought. D'Artagnan and Planchet mounted and took the road to Saint-Germain. All along the road, what Athos had said respecting Madame Bonacieux recurred to the mind of the young man. Although D'Artagnan was not of a very sentimental character, the mercer's pretty wife had made a real impression upon his heart. As he said, he was ready to go to the end of the world to seek her, but the world, being round, has many ends, so that he did not know which way to turn. Meantime, he was going to try to find out Milady. Milady had spoken to the man in the black cloak, therefore she knew him. Now, in the opinion of D'Artagnan, it was certainly the man in the black cloak who had carried off Madame Bonacieux the second time, as he had carried her off the first. D'Artagnan then only half lied, which is lying but little, when he said that by going in search of Milady, he at the same time went in search of Constance. Thinking of all this, and from time to time giving a touch of the spur to his horse, D'Artagnan completed his short journey and arrived at Saint-Germain. He had just passed by the pavilion in which, 10 years later, Louis XIV was born. He rode up a very quiet street, looking to the right and left to see if he could catch any vestige of his beautiful Englishwoman, when from the ground floor of a pretty house, which, according to the fashion of the time, had no window toward the street, he saw a face peep out, with which he thought he was acquainted. This person walked along the terrace, which was ornamented with flowers. Planchet recognized him first. "Eh, monsieur," said he, addressing D'Artagnan, "don't you remember that face which is blinking yonder?" "No," said D'Artagnan, "and yet I am certain it is not the first time I have seen that visage." "Parbleu, I believe it is not," said Planchet. "Why, it is poor Lubin, the lackey of the Comte de Wardes. He whom you took such good care of a month ago at Calais, on the road to the governor's country house." "So it is," said D'Artagnan. "I know him now. Do you think he would recollect you?" "My faith, monsieur, he was in such trouble that I doubt if he can have retained a very clear recollection of me." "Well, go and talk with the boy," said D'Artagnan, "and make out, if you can, from his conversation whether his master is dead." Planchet dismounted and went straight up to Lubin, who did not at all remember him, and the two lackeys began to chat with the best understanding possible, while D'Artagnan turned the two horses into a lane, went round the house, and came back to watch the conference from behind a hedge of filberts. At the end of an instant's observation, he heard the noise of a vehicle, and saw Milady's carriage stop opposite to him. He could not be mistaken. Milady was in it. D'Artagnan leaned upon the neck of his horse in order that he might see without being seen. Milady put her charming blonde head out at the window and gave her orders to her maid. The latter, a pretty girl of about 20 or 22 years, active and lively, the true soubrette of a great lady, jumped from the step upon which, according to the custom of the time, she was seated, and took her way toward the terrace upon which D'Artagnan had perceived Lubin. D'Artagnan followed the soubrette with his eyes, and saw her go toward the terrace, but it happened that someone in the house called Lubin, so that Planchet remained alone, looking in all directions for the road where D'Artagnan had disappeared. The maid approached Planchet, whom she took for Lubin, and holding out a little billet to him, said, "For your master." "For my master?" replied Planchet, astonished. "Yes, and important. Take it quickly." Thereupon she ran toward the carriage, which had turned round toward the way it came, jumped upon the step, and the carriage drove off. Planchet turned and returned the billet. Then, accustomed to passive obedience, he jumped down from the terrace, ran toward the lane, and at the end of 20 paces met D'Artagnan, who, having seen all, was coming to him. "For you, monsieur," said Planchet, presenting the billet to the young man. "For me?" said D'Artagnan. "Are you sure of that?" "Pardieu, monsieur, I can't be more sure. The soubrette said, 'For your master.' I have no other master but you, so—" "A pretty little lass, my faith, is that soubrette." D'Artagnan opened the letter and read these words: "A person who takes more interest in you than she is willing to confess wishes to know on what day it will suit you to walk in the forest. Tomorrow, at the Hotel Field of the Cloth of Gold, a lackey in black and red will wait for your reply." "Oh," said D'Artagnan, "this is rather warm. It appears that Milady and I are anxious about the health of the same person. Well, Planchet, how is the good Monsieur de Wardes? He is not dead, then?" "No, monsieur, he is as well as a man can be, with 4 sword wounds in his body. For you, without question, inflicted 4 upon the dear gentleman, and he is still very weak, having lost almost all his blood. As I said, monsieur, Lubin did not know me, and told me our adventure from one end to the other." "Well done, Planchet. You are the king of lackeys. Now jump onto your horse, and let us overtake the carriage." This did not take long. At the end of 5 minutes they perceived the carriage drawn up by the roadside. A cavalier, richly dressed, was close to the door. The conversation between Milady and the cavalier was so animated that D'Artagnan stopped on the other side of the carriage without anyone but the pretty soubrette perceiving his presence. The conversation took place in English, a language which D'Artagnan could not understand, but by the accent the young man plainly saw that the beautiful Englishwoman was in a great rage. She terminated it by an action which left no doubt as to the nature of this conversation. This was a blow with her fan applied with such force that the little feminine weapon flew into 1,000 pieces. The cavalier laughed aloud, which appeared to exasperate Milady still more. D'Artagnan thought this was the moment to interfere. He approached the other door, and taking off his hat respectfully, said, "Madame, will you permit me to offer you my services? It appears to me that this cavalier has made you very angry. Speak one word, madame, and I take upon myself to punish him for his want of courtesy." At the first word Milady turned, looking at the young man with astonishment, and when he had finished she said in very good French, "Monsieur, I should with great confidence place myself under your protection if the person with whom I quarrel were not my brother." "Ah, excuse me then," said D'Artagnan. "You must be aware that I was ignorant of that, madame." "What is that stupid fellow troubling himself about?" cried the cavalier, whom Milady had designated as her brother, stooping down to the height of the coach window. "Why does he not go about his business?" "Stupid fellow yourself," said D'Artagnan, stooping in his turn on the neck of his horse, and answering on his side through the carriage window, "I do not go on because it pleases me to stop here." The cavalier addressed some words in English to his sister. "I speak to you in French," said D'Artagnan. "Be kind enough, then, to reply to me in the same language. You are Madame's brother, I learn." "Be it so, but fortunately you are not mine." It might be thought that Milady, timid as women are in general, would have interposed in this commencement of mutual provocations in order to prevent the quarrel from going too far. But on the contrary, she threw herself back in her carriage and called out coolly to the coachman, "Go on, home." The pretty soubrette cast an anxious glance at D'Artagnan, whose good looks seemed to have made an impression on her. The carriage went on, and left the two men facing each other. No material obstacle separated them. The cavalier made a movement as if to follow the carriage, but D'Artagnan, whose anger already excited, was much increased by recognizing in him the Englishman of Amiens, who had won his horse and had been very near winning his diamond of Athos, caught at his bridle and stopped him. "Well, monsieur," said he, "you appear to be more stupid than I am, for you forget there is a little quarrel to arrange between us two." "Ah," said the Englishman, "is it you, my master? It seems you must always be playing some game or other." "Yes, and that reminds me that I have a revenge to take. We will see, my dear monsieur, if you can handle a sword as skillfully as you can a dice box." "You see plainly that I have no sword," said the Englishman. "Do you wish to play the braggart with an unarmed man? I hope you have a sword at home, but at all events I have two, and if you like I will throw with you for one of them." "Needless," said the Englishman. "I am well furnished with such playthings." "Very well, my worthy gentleman," replied D'Artagnan. "Pick out the longest and come and show it to me this evening." "Where, if you please?" "Behind the Luxembourg. That's a charming spot for such amusements as the one I propose to you." "That will do, I will be there." "Your hour?" 6 o'clock. "Apropos, you probably have one or two friends?" "I have 3 who would be honored by joining in the sport with me." "3? Marvelous! That falls out oddly. 3 is just my number." "Now then, who are you?" asked the Englishman. "I am Monsieur d'Artagnan, a Gascon gentleman, serving in the King's Musketeers. And you?" "I am Lord de Winter, Baron Sheffield." "Well, then, I am your servant, Monsieur Baron," said D'Artagnan, "though you have names rather difficult to recollect." And touching his horse with the spur, he cantered back to Paris. As he was accustomed to do in all cases of any consequence, D'Artagnan went straight to the residence of Athos. He found Athos reclining upon a large sofa, where he was waiting, as he said, for his outfit to come and find him. He related to Athos all that had passed, except the letter to Monsieur de Wardes. Athos was delighted to find he was going to fight an Englishman. We might say that was his dream. They immediately sent their lackeys for Porthos and Aramis, and on their arrival made them acquainted with the situation. Porthos drew his sword from the scabbard and made passes at the wall, springing back from time to time and making contortions like a dancer. Aramis, who was constantly at work at his poem, shut himself up in Athos's closet and begged not to be disturbed before the moment of drawing swords. Athos, by signs, desired Grimaud to bring another bottle of wine. D'Artagnan employed himself in arranging a little plan of which we shall hereafter see the execution, and which promised him some agreeable adventure, as might be seen by the smiles which from time to time passed over his countenance, whose thoughtfulness they animated. End of chapter 30.